My name is Azura Wilson, and I am 32 years old. Last Tuesday, my debit card declined at a New Hampshire gas pump in the freezing sleet. I was trying to buy 12 gallons of regular unleaded to get home after a double shift coordinating medical logistics at Memorial Hospital. I stood, shivering in my scrubs, checked my banking app, and expected to see the $48,000 I had saved over 4 years of overtime. Instead, a flat zero stared back at me. A single wire transfer had drained every penny to my brother Julian. He stole my exit fund to buy VIP World Cup tickets, and my mother told me I was being selfish for asking questions. What neither of them knew was that my grandfather had been quietly recording the living room from his wheelchair for 8 months. By the time Julian packed his designer bags, the entire family would watch him confess to federal wire fraud on a 65-inch screen. Welcome back to Edana Told Stories, where we tell quiet stories about ordinary women who stop swallowing the abuse and start setting the record straight. If you have ever sacrificed your own peace to keep a toxic family afloat, this story is for you. Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments, and be sure to subscribe. The wind off the Merrimack River bit through my thin hospital jacket. The gas pump screen blinked a cold green error message. Card declined. Please see cashier. I rubbed my thumb over the chipped plastic edge of my debit card. The sharp scent of industrial bleach from the hospital ward still lingered on my skin. My lower back carried a dull ache from 14 hours of tracking supply shipments. I climbed back into the driver's seat. The cold leather creaked under my weight. My phone had a deep diagonal crack across the glass. I never paid to fix it because every extra dollar went into one specific savings account, my exit fund, my down payment on a quiet life away from the noise. I opened my banking app. The blue circle spun for a second. Then the number landed. 0. I stopped breathing. The low hum of the car heater suddenly sounded deafening in the tight cabin. I tapped the refresh icon. The screen blinked, but the 0 remained. I opened the transaction ledger. One single line item sat at the very top, processed just 3 hours earlier. Wire transfer out. Recipient, Julian Wilson. Amount, $48,000. My chest tightened until my ribs physically ached. Years ago, my mother Sylvia convinced me to keep my name on a legacy joint account. She insisted it was a necessary safety net for family emergencies. I trusted the bank transfer limits. I trusted the simple fact that you do not steal from your own blood. I stared at the fractured glass of my phone. The stark 0 reflected in my dark eyes. The voice in my head sounded exactly like Sylvia. It told me not to cause a scene. It told me family handles these things quietly. I shifted the car into drive. The tires crunched heavily over the salted asphalt. Tears are a luxury for people with safety nets, and Julian had just stolen mine. I drove toward Sylvia's pristine suburban house in the dark. The panic in my stomach hardened into a cold and sharp focus. The bank required a notarized signature for a wire transfer of that size. Julian could not have just clicked a button. He had to forge my name. I parked my old sedan at the edge of Sylvia's wide, circular driveway. The house glowed with warm, expensive light. Through the sheer curtains of the bay window, I saw Julian sitting on the white linen sofa. He held a small porcelain cup, sipping espresso, with the relaxed posture of a man who owned the world. Sylvia stood near the fireplace, adjusting a silver picture frame. It looked like a magazine cover. It looked like a family that loved each other. I turned off the ignition. The engine shuddered and died. I walked up the brick path, my worn sneakers making no sound. I did not knock. I pushed the front door open. The sudden draft of freezing air made Sylvia turn around. Her smile tightened the moment she saw my faded scrubs. Julian did not even look up from his phone. "Azura," Sylvia said, her tone bright and brittle, "you are tracking salt onto the hardwood. Take your shoes off." I looked at the salt melting into dirty water on her pristine floor. Then I looked at my brother. "Where is the money, Julian?" My voice was quiet. It did not shake. Julian finally locked his phone and set it on the glass coffee table. He sighed, annoyed by the interruption. He leaned back against the cushions and offered me a condescending smile. "It is an investment, Azura." He crossed his legs, adjusting the crease in his tailored trousers. "I needed liquid capital to secure a networking opportunity in Europe. A venture capital group is hosting a suite at the World Cup. You hide money from family, that makes you selfish. We share resources. That is how dynasties are built." I looked from his smug face to Sylvia. She refused to meet my eyes. She picked up a microfiber cloth and began polishing the already spotless mantelpiece. "He is building a legacy, Azura." Sylvia kept her back to me, her voice smooth and practiced. "Your little warehouse job does not require a hoard of cash. You should be proud to support your brother." I stood in the foyer, the cold air still clinging to my clothes. $48,000. 4 years of missed holidays, double shifts, and gas station dinners. And they called it an investment. I tasted copper in my mouth. I wanted to break the glass table. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. But yelling at them would only give them a reason to call me unstable. "Okay," I said. One single word. Julian raised an eyebrow, surprised by how easily I folded. Sylvia finally turned around, her shoulders dropping in relief. In the corner of the room, sitting in his motorized wheelchair, Grandpa Harrison turned his head toward me. Everyone assumed his mind was gone, but as I met his eyes, he slowly raised his right hand and tapped his index finger against his armrest. Tap, tap, tap. A deliberate, steady rhythm. I nodded at the old man. I did not know it yet, but that quiet tapping was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "My name is Azura Wilson, and I am 32 years old. Last Tuesday, my debit card declined at a New Hampshire gas pump in the freezing sleet. I was trying to buy 12 gallons of regular unleaded to get home after a double shift coordinating medical logistics at Memorial Hospital. I stood shivering in my scrubs, checked my banking app, and expected to see the $48,000 I had saved over 4 years of overtime. Instead, a flat zero stared back at me. A single wire transfer had drained every penny to my brother Julian. He stole my exit fund to buy VIP World Cup tickets, and my mother told me I was being selfish for asking questions. What neither of them knew was that my grandfather had been quietly recording the living room from his wheelchair for 8 months. By the time Julian packed his designer bags, the entire family would watch him confess to federal wire fraud on a 65-inch screen. Welcome back to Edana Told Stories, where we tell quiet stories about ordinary women who stop swallowing the abuse and start setting the record straight. If you have ever sacrificed your own peace to keep a toxic family afloat, this story is for you. Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments, and be sure to subscribe. I left Sylvia's house that night because staying would have meant losing my temper, and losing my temper is a luxury I cannot afford. I drove back to my cramped one-bedroom apartment in the dark. The heater in my sedan rattled the entire way, blowing lukewarm air against the freezing windshield. I did not sleep. I sat at my small laminate kitchen table with my laptop open, bathed in the harsh blue light of the screen. I pulled up the bank terms of service. I traced the labyrinth of financial regulations. A standard daily transfer limit on a personal checking account caps at a few $1,000s. Moving $48,000 in a single wire transaction requires bypass authorization. It requires identity verification. Most importantly, it requires a signed, notarized wire transfer form submitted directly to a bank officer. Julian did not just guess a password. He had to manufacture my consent. The sun rose over New Hampshire like a pale gray bruise. The winter morning offered no warmth. I changed out of my hospital scrubs and put on a heavy wool sweater. I had to go back to Sylvia's house. Not to scream, but to play my role. I managed the medical logistics for the entire family, which included picking up and delivering Grandpa Harrison's heart medication every Sunday morning. Routine is the best camouflage. I pulled into Sylvia's wide, salt-swept driveway at 8 in the morning. The neighborhood was silent, filled with sprawling colonial homes and imported luxury cars. I unlocked the heavy oak front door with my spare key. The air inside smelled of expensive roasted coffee beans and vanilla air freshener. It was the scent of a family desperate to project an image of flawless success. Julian sat at the expansive marble kitchen island. He wore a crisp linen shirt and tailored slacks, looking entirely unbothered by the fact that he had just committed a federal crime. He held a small ceramic espresso cup, swirling the dark liquid with slow, deliberate motions. He looked up when I walked in, offering a tight, patronizing smile. He acted as though we were having a casual business meeting, rather than a confrontation over stolen life savings. "You left in a rush last night," Julian said, setting the cup down on a cork coaster. "You need to look at the bigger picture, Azura. You are treating this like a theft. It is an allocation of dormant assets." I set Harrison's paper pharmacy bag on the granite counter. My hands felt unnervingly steady. "Dormant assets," I repeated, letting the absurd phrase hang in the quiet kitchen. That was my down payment on a duplex in Concord. That was 4 years of overtime. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the marble. "A duplex is small thinking. I am securing a VIP suite at the World Cup in Europe. A European venture capital firm is hosting a private networking event in that specific tier. Do you understand the optics required to get into that room? I cannot show up looking like a tourist. I need premium access. I need to project wealth to attract wealth. When this venture capital deal closes, I will pay back your little savings fund with interest. You are investing in my networking. You should be thanking me for integrating you into a higher tax bracket." He spoke with the polished rhythm of a man who spent his life failing upward. He used corporate buzzwords to sanitize his actions. He truly believed his own delusion. He believed my manual labor was meant to fund his aristocratic cosplay. Footsteps clicked against the hardwood floor in the hallway. Sylvia floated into the kitchen wearing a pristine cashmere wrap. She carried a tall crystal vase filled with imported white lilies. She did not look at me. She walked straight to the center of the kitchen island and began adjusting the floral arrangement, plucking a microscopic brown spot off a petal. "Good morning, Azura," Sylvia said, her voice smooth and devoid of any maternal warmth. "I hope you have calmed down since yesterday. Julian explained the European strategy to me. It is a brilliant pivot." I stared at her hands, the manicured nails picking at the lilies. "He forged my signature on a bank authorization form, Mom. He emptied my account." Sylvia sighed, a delicate, breathy sound indicating her profound disappointment in me. She nudged the crystal vase a fraction of an inch to the left, ensuring it sat perfectly dead center on the marble island. "Stop using such dramatic language," Sylvia said, finally looking up. Her eyes were hard and flat. "Nobody forged anything. You left your name on the family emergency account. Your brother had an emergency. He needed liquid capital to secure his future. You have a steady paycheck from the hospital. You do not need to hoard wealth like a dragon while your own brother tries to build a legacy for this family name. You hiding that kind of money from us makes you selfish, Azura. It shows a severe lack of loyalty." The psychological trap snapped shut around me. Sylvia possessed a terrifying talent for reversing reality. In her pristine suburban kingdom, the victim was the villain. Working 70-hour weeks to buy a modest home was considered greedy hoarding. Stealing 50 grand to drink champagne at a soccer game was considered building a legacy. This was the matriarchal illusion I had lived under my entire life. Financial abuse rebranded as family unity. A sharp, desperate urge to fight clawed at my throat. I wanted to swipe the crystal vase off the counter and watch it shatter across the spotless floor. I wanted to drag Julian to the local police precinct by his tailored collar. But anger is loud, and loud people are easily dismissed as hysterical. If I screamed, Sylvia would win. She would label me unhinged, and Julian would walk away playing the victim. To catch a thief who operates in the open, you have to convince them they have already won. I closed my mouth. I bit down on the soft inside tissue of my cheek. I bit down hard until the sharp metallic taste of copper flooded my tongue. The physical pain acted as an anchor grounding the psychological storm raging in my head. I swallowed the blood. I forced my shoulders to drop, mimicking the posture of a defeated, broken woman. "Fine," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on the marble floor. "If it is an investment for the family, just make sure you pay it back." Julian grinned a wide, victorious expression that made my stomach turn. He thought I was weak. He thought the lifelong conditioning had worked again. "I knew you would see reason," Julian said, standing up and smoothing the front of his shirt. "I have a tailor appointment downtown. Got to look the part for the investors. Thanks for the capital, sis." He picked up his keys from the counter and strutted out of the kitchen, his leather shoes clicking against the hardwood with arrogant rhythm. The front door opened and closed, sealing the silence back into the house. Sylvia offered a satisfied hum, returning her attention to the lilies, completely dismissing my presence now that I had submitted. I picked up the pharmacy bag and walked out of the kitchen, heading toward the back living room where Grandpa Harrison spent his days. The air in the house felt thick and suffocating, a claustrophobic maze of delusions and stolen money. I stepped into the dim living room. Harrison sat in his motorized wheelchair near the unlit fireplace. A thick plaid blanket rested over his frail knees. Sylvia treated him like a piece of antique furniture, assuming his silence meant his mind had decayed. She spoke about him as if he were already gone. I approached him quietly to set the medication bottles on his side table. As I reached out, Harrison turned his head. His eyes were not cloudy or vacant. They were sharp, piercing, and terrifyingly lucid. He looked at my face, reading the fresh humiliation etched into my features. He looked toward the hallway where Julian had just strutted out. Then Harrison lowered his gaze to his right armrest. He raised his index finger. Tap, tap, tap. It was a deliberate, steady rhythm. It was not a tremor. It was a signal. He stopped tapping and looked back up at me, his eyes burning with a silent, fierce intelligence. The claustrophobia in my chest suddenly cracked open, letting in a single cold ray of light. I realized right then that the quietest person in the house was the only one paying attention, and he knew exactly what they had done. The heavy oak front door swung inward, hitting the rubber wall stop with a dull thud. The sound was immediately followed by the high-pitched squeal of brand-new polyurethane caster wheels rolling across the foyer hardwood. Bianca, Julian's wife, pushed her way into the house. She wore a tailored beige trench coat and oversized dark sunglasses, despite the heavy gray cloud cover outside. She kicked the door shut behind her with the heel of a pristine suede boot. Trailing behind her was a three-piece set of top-tier designer luggage. The leather was a deep, flawless chestnut. The brass hardware gleamed under the warm foyer lights, pristine and untouched by any baggage handler. I stood near the edge of the living room, watching her maneuver the heavy trunks. My mind operated in the strict, unforgiving metrics of medical logistics. I recognized the brand instantly. The large trunk retailed for $6,000. The carry-on was $4,000. The matching cosmetic case was $2,000. $12,000 of luggage purchased to transport clothes for a single vacation. I did not see leather and brass. I saw my own stolen time. I saw 90 shifts at the hospital. I saw endless nights sleeping in a stiff plastic break room chair, eating cold oatmeal from a styrofoam cup. I saw the aching joints in my knees and the permanent dark circles under my eyes. Bianca carelessly shoved the cosmetic case with her foot, letting it bump hard against the baseboard. She treated the items with the casual disregard of someone who had never traded physical pain for a paycheck. Sylvia glided out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a fresh linen towel. Her face lit up with a brilliant, artificial warmth. She gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as she admired the bags. "Oh, Bianca, those are stunning," Sylvia cooed, circling the luggage like a predator inspecting a prize. "The grain is exquisite. Julian mentioned you were upgrading your travel set for the European trip. You simply cannot check into a luxury suite with nylon duffels." Bianca pulled off her sunglasses, revealing perfectly contoured makeup. She sighed a theatrical, breathless sigh. "It was a necessity, Sylvia. The venture capital wives in these circles are ruthless. They judge everything. Julian insisted I buy the matching set. He said we needed to project total confidence. She spoke the word necessity without a shred of irony. My exit, fund my down payment for a quiet life, was currently sitting on the floor in the shape of chestnut leather. I remained silent. I kept my back straight and my expression entirely neutral. Julian had stolen the money, but Bianca was the one parading the spoils. She married Julian 3 years ago, bringing a pedigree of high credit limits and zero actual capital. She thrived on the aesthetic of wealth, funding her lifestyle through Julian's relentless grifts. Sylvia linked her arm through Bianca's, steering her toward the kitchen. "Leave the bags in the hall, darling. I just poured fresh mimosas. We have so much to discuss regarding your itinerary." They disappeared around the corner. Their bright, overlapping laughter echoed off the high ceilings. I stayed in the dim living room with Grandpa Harrison. He remained motionless in his wheelchair, his eyes fixed on the unlit fireplace. I walked over to the mahogany side table to straighten a stack of architectural magazines. The family iPad sat on top of the pile, propped up in a thick leather case. The screen was dark, but as I reached out, a notification tone chimed. The display lit up, casting a sharp blue glow across the wood grain. An email preview appeared on the lock screen. The sender was an international travel concierge service based in London. The subject line read, "Urgent confirmation required." I leaned in, my heart rate accelerating. The preview text was brief, but damning. "Regarding the recent priority wire transfer, Mrs. Wilson, we require your signature on the final suite upgrades to clear the funds." My breath hitched. Mrs. Wilson. Julian was not the only one orchestrating this theft. The email strongly suggested Bianca had authorized the secondary transfers or was heavily coordinating the deployment of my money. A cold, sharp fury spiked in my chest. The narrative shifted in my head. Julian was the arrogant thief, but Bianca was the quiet architect pulling the strings from behind her designer sunglasses to ensure her luxury European vacation went off without a hitch. The urge to confront her hit me like a physical blow. The careful restraint I had built all morning began to fracture. I wanted to march into that kitchen, grab the iPad, and force Bianca to read the email aloud in front of Sylvia. I wanted to watch her flawless makeup crack. I wanted to see the panic in her eyes when she realized I knew exactly how she funded her chestnut leather luggage. I grabbed the iPad. The leather case felt hot in my grip. I turned toward the kitchen hallway. My pulse pounded in my ears, a frantic drumbeat demanding immediate justice. I took one heavy step forward. A sharp, explosive crash shattered the quiet living room. I flinched, my shoulders jumping. Hot liquid splattered across my ankles. I looked down. Grandpa Harrison's porcelain teacup lay in a dozen jagged pieces across the expensive Persian rug. Dark brown tea soaked into the intricate woven fibers, creating a rapidly expanding stain. "What on earth was that?" Sylvia shrieked from the kitchen. Her rapid footsteps echoed down the hall. I froze. I looked at Harrison. His frail, paper-thin hand hovered over the armrest of his wheelchair, exactly where the teacup had been resting seconds ago. He did not look startled. He did not look confused. His piercing eyes met mine, holding a fierce, silent command. The drop was not an accident. It was a calculated intervention. He had broken the cup to stop me from walking into the kitchen. I let out a slow, shaking breath. I set the iPad back onto the mahogany table, sliding it face down. The blinding rage in my chest cooled, replaced by a sudden, terrifying clarity. Confronting Bianca now would ruin everything. It would give them a chance to hide the paper trail. Harrison had just saved me from my own temper. I knelt on the floor just as Sylvia rounded the corner, a mimosa glass trembling in her hand. Bianca followed closely behind, looking horrified at the ruined rug. "Look at this mess," Sylvia snapped, pointing her manicured finger at the spilled tea. "Azura, please clean this up before the stain sets. He is getting so clumsy." I did not argue. I did not cower. I maintained my dignity, keeping my spine straight as I carefully gathered the sharp porcelain shards. I was not a servant bowing at their feet. I was a technician dismantling a hazard. As I reached for a piece near the wheel of the chair, Harrison leaned forward slightly. His hand dropped down, moving with surprising speed. His knuckles brushed against the fabric of my hospital scrubs. I felt a small, stiff piece of folded paper slide smoothly into my front pocket. I did not react. I kept my eyes on the floor, sweeping the last of the shards into my cupped hand. "And while you are at it," Sylvia huffed, turning her irritation toward the corner of the room. She pointed toward the tall oak bookshelf resting against the far wall. "See if you can unplug that dreadful internet router behind the books. The blue light has been blinking for 3 days straight. It flashes right in my peripheral vision and gives me a terrible migraine." I glanced at the bookshelf. A faint rhythmic blue pulse reflected off the polished wood paneling. It was steady, unblinking. "I will take care of it," I said, my voice smooth and even. I stood up, holding the broken porcelain in my hands. I walked past Sylvia and Bianca without looking at them. I headed straight for the guest bathroom at the end of the hall. I stepped inside and pushed the heavy door shut, twisting the brass lock until it clicked. The bathroom was a sanctuary of cold marble and silence. I turned on the sink, letting the water run to mask any sound. I dried my hands on a guest towel. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached into my scrub pocket. I pulled out the thick square of folded paper. The edges were sharp. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, written in dark blue ink, but the letters were precise and deliberate. There were no words. It was just a string of numbers, an IP address. Right below the address was an 8-character alphanumeric password. I stared at the paper. My mind raced, connecting the scattered pieces of the morning. Harrison did not own a computer. He did not know how to operate a tablet, yet he had handed me an exact network address. I thought about the faint blue light pulsing behind the antique oak bookshelf. Sylvia thought it was a router, but internet routers do not hide behind heavy furniture. Security cameras do. The mystery tightened around my throat. The loud, entitled siblings were busy drinking mimosas and planning European vacations, entirely blind to their surroundings. The quiet old man in the wheelchair knew exactly what they were doing, and he had just handed me the key to the vault. I flushed the guest bathroom toilet to sell the lie. I washed my hands with cold water and dried them thoroughly. The folded square of paper felt heavy inside my scrub pocket. I stepped back out into the hallway. The house was quiet. Sylvia and Bianca had moved their conversation to the outdoor patio, their voices muffled by the thick, double-pane glass doors. I walked back into the living room. Grandpa Harrison was resting his eyes, his breathing slow and rhythmic. I knelt beside the antique oak bookshelf. I reached behind the heavy wood frame, feeling for the power cords. My fingers brushed against a small, hard plastic square, mounted directly to the baseboard. The faint blue light pulsed against my skin. It was not a router. It was a high-definition, wide-angle security lens. I did not unplug it. Instead, I traced a different cord, finding the plug for a decorative floor lamp, and pulled that from the wall socket. I stood up, dusted off my knees, and walked out the front door. I drove straight to my apartment. The drive took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind cataloged the physical evidence. I parked my sedan in the uncovered lot and took the concrete stairs 2 at a time to my second-floor unit. My apartment was small, sterile, and quiet. It was the exact opposite of Sylvia's sprawling, chaotic estate. I dropped my keys on the laminate counter and sat down at my small kitchen table. I opened my laptop. The hinge creaked. The screen cast a pale glow across my face. I opened a private browser window. I smoothed out the piece of paper Harrison had slipped into my pocket. I typed the sequence of numbers into the address bar. The screen loaded a stark gray login portal. A prompt asked for an administrative password. I typed the 8 alphanumeric characters from the note. I pressed the return key. The portal unlocked. A sleek professional security dashboard populated my screen. The name of the software provider triggered a specific memory. 6 months ago, Harrison had demanded a security technician visit the house. He suspected a temporary home health aide named Denise was stealing his prescription hydrocodone. Sylvia had staged a theatrical fit over the request. She called the installation paranoid garbage and complained about the upfront cost. 2 weeks after the camera was installed, Sylvia canceled the monthly cloud storage subscription to save $40. She assumed that canceling the cloud service disabled the device. She was wrong. The technician had installed a local micro-secure digital card inside the camera housing. It recorded everything on a continuous loop, overwriting the oldest footage first. The blue light never stopped blinking. I clicked on the Archive tab. A calendar appeared, filled with tiny green dots indicating recorded motion. I navigated to Tuesday, the exact date my bank account was drained. I filtered the timestamps, narrowing the window to the 3 hours before my card declined at the gas station. I selected a file named Afternoon Living Room. I pressed play. The video feed was terrifyingly crisp. The camera angle captured the entire room, from the edge of the fireplace to the marble kitchen hallway. The built-in microphone picked up the ambient sound of the house with sharp clarity. On the screen, the living room was empty for a few seconds. Then, Julian paced into the frame. He wore a tailored suit jacket and held a thick manila folder. He looked nervous. He kept checking his expensive wristwatch. Sylvia walked into the frame a moment later. She held a glass of white wine. She sat down on the linen sofa, crossing her legs. She did not look like a mother indulging her son. She looked like a business partner, waiting for a status report. "Did it clear?" Sylvia asked on the video. Her voice echoed through my laptop speakers, sharp and demanding. Julian stopped pacing. He opened the manila folder and pulled out a stack of banking documents. "The wire is pending. The funds will hit my offshore holding account in 2 hours. $48,000. I sat frozen at my kitchen table. Hearing them say the number out loud felt like a physical strike to my chest. "The teller did not ask questions," Sylvia asked, taking a slow sip of her wine. Julian scoffed. He held up a specific piece of paper to the light. "I did not go to a teller. I went to the commercial desk. I handed them the notarized wire transfer authorization form. It is a bulletproof document. I traced Azura's signature using the backlight of my tablet. It took me 10 minutes to perfect the loop of her letter A. Then I took it to Marcus." Sylvia nodded, swirling the wine in her glass. "The notary, whose license is suspended." "He still has the official stamp," Julian said, grinning on the screen. "I gave him $500 to stamp the authorization. The bank saw the official seal and pushed the wire through immediately. By the time Azura figures out the money is gone, it will be layered through 3 different European accounts. She will assume it was an identity theft hack. She will spend months fighting the fraud department while we are sitting in the VIP suite." I stopped breathing. Julian had just confessed to identity theft forgery and federal wire fraud. He detailed his entire criminal methodology into a high-definition microphone. He was arrogant enough to believe the walls were deaf, but the truth did not stop there. The video continued playing. The narrative I had believed my entire life shattered right in front of me. I always thought Sylvia was just a blind enabler. I thought she protected Julian because he was the golden child. I thought her financial demands were just a byproduct of her aristocratic delusions. On the screen, Sylvia set her wine glass down on the coffee table. The soft maternal facade vanished. Her face hardened into a mask of pure calculation. "Send $20,000 to my private checking account," Sylvia commanded. It was not a request. Julian flinched. He clutched the manila folder against his chest. 20. Mom, we agreed on 10. The venture capital suite costs 15 alone. I need the rest for the luxury car rentals and the networking dinners. If I give you 20, my margins are too thin." "Your margins are not my concern," Sylvia snapped. She leaned forward, pointing a manicured finger at him. "I need $20,000 to cover my markers. The offshore poker sites are threatening to initiate a collection protocol against the house deed. I have been losing heavy on the digital tables for 3 months. If they put a lien on this property, the country club board will find out. I will lose my standing. You will send me $20,000 today, or I will call Azura right now and tell her exactly what you did." The plot twist dropped like a heavy stone in my stomach. Sylvia was not a victim of Julian's charm. She was a parasite. She was a severe gambling addict drowning in secret debt. She had actively extorted her own son to steal my life savings just to cover her online poker losses. She was a co-conspirator. She orchestrated the timing of the theft to save her own social reputation. The mother I knew was a fiction. The woman on the screen was a predator.
Julian glared at her, his jaw tight with anger. But he nodded. Fine, 20,000. Just keep Azura distracted. Tell her she is selfish if she brings it up. Use the loyalty angle. It always shuts her down. It always does, Sylvia agreed, picking her wine glass back up. I paused the video. The frame froze on Sylvia's calculating smile. My hands felt numb. The betrayal was total. My own mother had weaponized my sense of duty, labeling me greedy to keep me compliant, while she siphoned my labor to fund her digital card games. Every overtime shift, every missed meal, every ache in my bones had been traded for poker chips and designer luggage. I did not cry. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical strategy. I moved my cursor over the video file. I right-clicked the trackpad. I hit download. A small progress bar appeared at the bottom of my screen. The file transferred from the hidden camera directly to my encrypted local hard drive. I clicked the next file, and the next. I downloaded an entire month of footage. I found videos of Julian casually slipping cash out of Harrison's wallet while the old man pretended to sleep. I found videos of Sylvia screaming at customer service representatives about her declined credit cards. I gathered every piece of digital evidence. The progress bar hit 100%. The files were secure. This was no longer a family disagreement over shared resources. This was a documented federal felony. Julian had committed wire fraud and forgery. Sylvia was guilty of extortion and conspiracy. I clicked my pen, the sound echoing in my quiet kitchen. They had stolen my money, but Harrison had handed me their freedom. I closed the laptop. I needed an attorney who specialized in federal financial crimes, and I needed to set a trap they could not escape. The freezing rain turned Elm Street into a gray, reflecting mirror. I walked 2 blocks from the cheap parking garage to the downtown Manchester legal district. My canvas tote bag felt heavy against my hip, holding my laptop and a thick folder of printed bank records. The brass plaque next to the heavy glass door read, "Sterling Davis, Attorney at Law." The lobby smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic bleach I breathed at the hospital. I wore my only tailored blazer over a plain white blouse. I needed to look like a client worth fighting for, not a broken victim asking for charity. A receptionist with pristine hair directed me to a corner office. The room was intimidating by design. Dark mahogany paneled the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the storm clouds rolling over the city. Attorney Davis sat behind a sprawling walnut desk. He was a veteran litigator in his late 50s, wearing a sharp charcoal suit. His eyes held the tired, pragmatic exhaustion of a man who spent his life untangling the worst mistakes people could make. He gestured to a high-backed leather chair across from him. I sat down. The chair was designed to make the occupant sink, subtle physical engineering meant to establish authority. I kept my spine rigid, refusing to touch the backrest. "Tell me about the missing funds," Ms. Wilson Davis said. His voice was gravelly and direct. He held a silver pen over a legal pad, ready to distill my ruined life into billable hours. I gave him the sterile facts. $48,000 drained in a single wire transfer. I explained the destination account belonged to my brother Julian. I maintained a steady, clinical tone, treating the theft like a misrouted hospital supply shipment. Davis stopped writing. He tapped the silver pen against the yellow paper. He looked at me with a mixture of professional pity and profound boredom. "Whose name is on the origin account?" "Mine," I said. I swallowed hard. "And my mother, Sylvia. It is an old joint account." Davis sighed. He set the pen down. He had heard this exact story 1,000 times. He leaned back in his chair, resting his hands on his stomach. "I am going to be honest with you," Davis said, his tone shifting into a practice lecture. "Family financial disputes involving joint accounts are a civil nightmare. The law assumes implied consent.
Your mother is on the account. She has legal authority to authorize a transfer. If your brother accessed the funds through her, the police will refuse to intervene. They will call it a civil matter. You could sue him, but civil litigation takes years. It requires a retainer of at least $15,000 just to initiate discovery. By the time we get a court date, the money will be spent. He reached for a sleek black leather briefcase resting on the edge of his desk. He popped the brass latches open, preparing to pack his notes and end the consultation. Julian is a ghost when it comes to paper trails. Davis continued placing his legal pad inside the briefcase. Without a confession or hard proof of unauthorized access, pursuing this will only drain whatever money you have left. You need to walk away. He pressed the lid of the briefcase down. The sharp snap of the brass latches echoed in the quiet office. It was the sound of the systemic machine closing its doors on my survival. It was a pebble of defeat, heavy and final. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out my laptop. I set it on the polished walnut desk. "Give me 2 minutes of your time, Mr. Davis," I said softly, "before you tell me to walk away." Davis paused, his hand still resting on the handle of his briefcase. He looked at my face, searching for hysteria. He found nothing but cold, flat certainty. He withdrew his hand and gestured toward the screen. I opened the laptop. I navigated to the encrypted folder and pulled up the high-definition video file. I turned the screen to face him. I pressed play. The security footage filled the silence of the mahogany room. The hidden camera angle captured Julian pacing the living room. It captured Sylvia sitting on the sofa, swirling her white wine. The built-in microphone was terrifyingly clear. Davis watched Julian brag about the venture capital suite. He watched the young man smile as he detailed tracing my signature using the backlight of a tablet. He listened to Julian admit to bribing a suspended notary with $500 to stamp the forged wire transfer authorization form. Davis leaned forward. His professional boredom evaporated. The tired posture vanished, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a veteran litigator smelling blood in the water. The video continued. Sylvia's voice cut through the speakers, sharp and demanding. She extorted her own son for a $20,000 cut. She confessed to spiraling online gambling debts. She threatened to expose him if he did not pay her offshore markers. I reached out and pressed the spacebar. The video paused on Sylvia's calculating face. Davis stared at the frozen screen. The silence in the office was thick. He looked at me, then back at the laptop. "Where did you get this?" Davis asked, his voice low and urgent. "My grandfather installed a hidden camera behind a bookshelf," I explained. "They thought the cloud service was canceled. They did not know it recorded to a local memory card." Davis let out a slow, sharp exhale. He reached into his briefcase, pulling the yellow legal pad back out. The silver pen clicked. "This is not a civil dispute," Ms. Wilson Davis said, writing rapidly. "This is Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, federal wire fraud. It is also federal identity theft and criminal forgery. The suspended notary is an unindicted co-conspirator. Your mother is guilty of extortion and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The local police will not touch this because it belongs on the desk of a federal prosecutor." "There is more," I said. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a manila folder containing Grandpa Harrison's bank statements. I managed his medical logistics, which included tracking his pharmacy copays. I slid the folder across the desk. "I downloaded the rest of the camera footage," I told him. "I have video of Julian taking cash directly out of Harrison's wallet while he sleeps. I matched the dates on the videos to unexplained ATM withdrawals from Harrison's pension account over the last 6 months." Davis opened the folder. He reviewed the highlighted lines on the bank statements. He did the math in his head. He looked up at me, a profound respect settling into his eyes. "Skimming a vulnerable senior citizen," Davis murmured. "Elder abuse. That elevates the entire profile of the case. A judge will not show leniency for someone stealing from a disabled war generation veteran." I felt a dark satisfaction bloom in my chest. The systemic wall had crumbled. I held a loaded weapon.
"We freeze his accounts," I said. "We take it back."
Davis held up a hand, slowing my momentum. The tactical reality of the legal system required patience. "We will take it back," Davis corrected, "but we have to be surgical. Your brother intends to route this stolen money into a European venture capital event. He mentioned offshore holding accounts. If he gets a single hint that you are building a case, he will accelerate the transfers. He will move the capital into untraceable cryptocurrency exchanges or wire it to a foreign shell company. The money will evaporate permanently." I felt a cold chill run down my arms. How do we stop him? "We file for an ex parte asset freeze," Davis explained, leaning his elbows on the desk. "It is an emergency injunction. A judge signs the order in secret without notifying the defendant. The moment the ink dries, the federal banking system locks every account tied to his Social Security number. But securing an ex parte order requires an ironclad evidentiary foundation. I have to draft the affidavits, catalog the video evidence, and brief a federal magistrate. It will take me exactly 5 days to build the trap." 5 days. 120 hours. "What do I do until then?" I asked. Davis looked at me, his expression grim and sympathetic. "You do exactly what you have always done. You play the compliant sister. You play the defeated daughter. You cannot avoid them. If you suddenly cut off contact, your mother will smell a rat. She knows she used your loyalty to manipulate you. If you break that pattern now, they will panic and move the money. You have to go back into their house, sit at their dinner table, and smile." The new conflict settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I had the evidence, I had the lawyer, but my final obstacle was my own endurance. I had to walk willingly back into a house of predators and pretend I was still their prey. I had to look at the woman who sold my future for poker chips and serve her iced tea. I had to listen to the man who forged my name brag about his European networking strategy. I stood up. I slid my laptop back into the canvas tote bag. "I can do 5 days," I said. My voice was steady, betraying none of the terror tightening my throat. "Do not confront them," Davis warned as I walked toward the door. "Do not drop hints. Do not show them your anger. You are a ghost until I tell you to pull the trigger." I nodded once and stepped out of the office. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent. I pushed through the heavy glass doors back onto Elm Street. The freezing rain had turned into a thick, wet snow. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the building exterior. I practiced the smile. It was small, tight, and defeated. It was the exact smile Sylvia expected to see on my face. I held the expression until my facial muscles ached. The trap was set. The legal machinery was moving. But the bait was my own sanity, and Sunday family dinner was only 2 days away. Sunday dinner at Sylvia's house was a heavily orchestrated theatrical performance. The dining room smelled of roasted rosemary lemon pepper and expensive beeswax candles. Heavy silver cutlery gleamed under the warm glow of the crystal chandelier. I sat near the foot of the long mahogany table, wearing a faded beige cardigan over plain jeans. I had to look the part of the broken, compliant daughter. Attorney Davis had drawn the boundary lines. I was the bait, and the trap required me to sit perfectly still while the predators circled. Grandpa Harrison sat in his wheelchair at the far end of the room, his chin resting on his chest, pretending to doze. Sylvia sat at the head of the table, carving the roast chicken with surgical, practiced motions. Julian sat directly across from me. Julian wore a dark cashmere turtleneck, his hair perfectly styled. He did not look like a man facing a federal indictment. He looked distracted. He kept his smartphone resting beside his wine glass, his thumb swiping across the screen with rapid, irritated movements. The stolen $48,000 was supposed to cover his entire European networking venture. But the illusion of wealth comes with hidden, exorbitant fees. The VIP World Cup suite did not cover the VAT taxes. It did not cover the security deposit for the Aston Martin rental he wanted to drive around the Mediterranean coast. It did not cover the Michelin star dinners required to court the venture capitalists he was trying to impress. Through the tight clenching of his jaw and the frantic scrolling of his thumb,
I read his hubris. He was bleeding cash before his flight even boarded. He needed more capital. He viewed me, not as a sister, but as a compromised ATM. He knew my legacy banking profile had a secondary emergency credit line attached to it, a safety net with a $10,000 limit I had never touched. He assumed I was too intimidated, too beaten down by the events of the week to monitor my digital alerts. My phone rested on my thigh, hidden beneath a thick linen dinner napkin. It vibrated, a single sharp buzz. I kept my face entirely neutral. I did not break eye contact with the center arrangement of white lilies. I slid my left hand under the table, unlocking the screen with my thumbprint. The blue glow illuminated the fabric of my scrub pants. It was an automated fraud alert from my secondary credit provider. Attempted cash advance, line of credit, $10,000, location pending. Julian locked his phone screen. He slid the device a few inches away and looked up, meeting my eyes across the table. His expression transformed instantly, melting into a warm, charming smile. "Azura," Julian said, his voice smooth and polite, "could you pass the Himalayan salt?" The sheer audacity of the moment struck me like a physical blow. He was actively pressing a digital button under the table to plunge me into $10,000 of high-interest debt, and in the very same breath, he was making polite dinner conversation. He was robbing me while asking for a condiment. I reached out and picked up the small crystal shaker. I slid it across the polished mahogany surface. Julian caught it. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. His skin was warm. My blood felt like ice. "Thank you," Julian said, sprinkling the salt over his meal. I lowered my left hand back under the table. I opened my encrypted messaging application. I typed blind, relying on muscle memory developed over years of coordinating emergency hospital dispatch logistics during chaotic shifts. I sent a direct message to Attorney Davis. "Fraud alert triggered. 10,000 advance. Do not freeze the account yet. Tell the bank portal to decline the transaction due to a network timeout. Trap the originating IP address." I set the phone back on my thigh. I picked up my fork and took a small bite of chicken. It tasted like ash. I chewed slowly, counting the seconds in my head. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a heavy metronomic rhythm. My phone vibrated twice. A reply from Davis. "Request denied. IP address secured and logged. It routes directly to the residential router inside your current location. We have the digital fingerprint. He just handed us the intent to commit secondary credit fraud." A dark, profound satisfaction settled into the bottom of my stomach. Julian had tried to steal from the emergency line, leaving a hard digital footprint that tied the attempted theft directly to his physical presence in Sylvia's dining room. A minute later, Julian picked up his phone to check the status of his transfer. I watched his face closely. His smug smile faltered. A tight, ugly crease appeared between his eyebrows. The screen showed a network timeout error rather than a confirmation of funds. He assumed it was a weekend banking glitch, a minor inconvenience that he would fix on Monday morning. He tossed the phone back onto the table face down and took a heavy, frustrated swallow of his Pinot Noir. Sylvia cleared her throat, drawing the attention of the table. She set down her silver carving knife and folded her hands together. She offered a deep, theatrical sigh, playing the role of the weary matriarch carrying the burdens of the estate. "The county assessor sent the winter property tax bill yesterday," Sylvia announced. Her voice carried a practiced, melodic distress. "It is higher than I anticipated. Maintaining this family home requires so much sacrifice. The upkeep is simply draining." Usually, Sylvia managed the property taxes. Or rather, she pretended to pay them while secretly shuffling debts. But the hidden camera footage had revealed the truth. Sylvia was drowning in offshore gambling markers. She had extorted $20,000 of my stolen money just to keep the digital poker sites from placing a lien on the house. She was entirely strapped for cash, and her aristocratic lifestyle was collapsing inward. Sylvia turned her flat, unyielding gaze toward me. "Julian has his capital tied up in the European networking venture," Sylvia said, gesturing gracefully toward my brother.
He is carrying the weight of our family future right now. He cannot be distracted by domestic bills. I think it is your turn to step up, Azura. You need to handle the property tax payment this cycle. It is $8,000. She framed the extortion as a moral obligation. She delivered the demand as a test of my loyalty, a subtle punishment because I had behaved so selfishly by questioning the stolen wire transfer earlier in the week. She wanted to bleed me dry to subsidize her own addiction. The dramatic irony was a heavy, suffocating presence in the room. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had secretly plotted to drain my life savings to pay her gambling debts, now asking me to pay the taxes on the very house she was slowly losing. I reached for my crystal water goblet. The condensation made the glass slippery. The ice cubes clinked sharply against the rim. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The freezing water washed down the dry lump in my throat. I lowered the glass, leaving a wet ring on the linen tablecloth. I will handle the property taxes, Mom, I said, my voice perfectly steady and submissive. You do not need to worry about a thing. Sylvia offered a tight, victorious smile. She believed the matriarchal illusion remained intact. Julian returned to eating his meal, satisfied that the natural order of the house had been restored. Neither of them realized they were sitting inside a cage, and I was the one holding the lock. Dinner concluded without another incident. I stood up and began clearing the porcelain plates, playing the obedient servant to perfection. I carried the heavy stack of dishes into the kitchen, the swinging door shutting behind me. I set the plates into the stainless steel sink and turned on the hot water. My phone vibrated against my thigh one more time. I pulled it out, expecting a follow-up message from the attorney. It was a text from Aunt Beatrice, my father's sister, the only relative who had always seen through Sylvia's flawless suburban facade. I am coming by your logistics office tomorrow morning. We need to talk about your mother. I stared at the glowing text message, the hot water running over my hands. Aunt Beatrice possessed a dangerous, sharp intuition. She could smell financial rot from a mile away. If she confronted Sylvia prematurely, the ensuing chaos would shatter the quiet federal trap Davis and I had spent the last 3 days building. Julian would panic, the funds would move offshore, and my exit strategy would vanish into the European ether. The legal snare was almost ready, but keeping Beatrice from kicking the tripwire was going to be the hardest maneuver of the week. The logistics office in the basement of Memorial Hospital was a windowless, concrete bunker. I spent my Monday morning tracking a delayed freight shipment of sterile surgical instruments. The phone line blinked red. The dual computer monitors cast a harsh glare across my tired eyes. The air vent above my desk rattled with a steady, metallic hum. I rubbed my temples, trying to focus on the digital manifests. The exhaustion from the weekend pressed down on my shoulders like a weighted vest. The heavy fire door at the end of the hall swung open. I looked up. Aunt Beatrice walked into the dispatch center. She was my father's older sister. A striking African-American woman in her early 60s, she possessed an effortless dignity that Sylvia always resented. Beatrice wore a structured navy trench coat and carried a sleek leather handbag. She moved with quiet authority, her low heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. Beatrice stopped at my desk. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a tall, paper cup. She set it gently next to my keyboard. The rich scent of dark roast coffee and toasted hazelnut cut through the underlying hospital odor of bleach and stale paper. You look like you have not slept since Thursday Azura, Beatrice said. Her voice was rich, deep, and uncompromisingly honest. I wrapped my hands around the warm paper cup. It was a rare, genuine gesture of female solidarity. In Sylvia's house, every cup of tea came with a hidden invoice. Beatrice gave freely, without conditions. It is just a busy quarter for supply chains, I lied smoothly. The vendors are missing their delivery windows. Beatrice pulled up a spare aluminum folding chair and sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not buy my excuse for a single second. She had retired after 30 years as a regional bank manager. She understood ledgers, and more importantly, she understood people who lied about them. Sylvia called me on Friday, Beatrice stated. She held my gaze. She left a frantic voicemail. She asked me for a short-term loan of $20,000. She claimed it was to repair the slate roof. I drove past the house yesterday. The roof is fine. Then I saw Julian posting online about securing VIP tickets for a European soccer tournament. The math does not balance, Azura. A mother begging for roof money while the son buys luxury suites across the ocean. My stomach tightened. Sylvia had tried to extort Beatrice right before Julian forged my signature. The gambling debts were suffocating her, and she had cast a wide net before finally deciding to drain my life savings. They have their own financial arrangements, I said, choosing my words with extreme caution. Beatrice leaned forward. Her sharp eyes analyzed the dark circles under my eyes and the fraying cuffs of my cardigan. Sylvia is a parasite, Beatrice said softly. She always was. My brother loved her, but he was blind to her profound entitlement. She is bleeding you dry to subsidize Julian. I know she makes you pay her utility bills. I know she expects you to handle the property taxes. She reached into her leather handbag. She pulled out a slim, navy blue checkbook and a silver fountain pen. She unscrewed the cap and placed the items on my desk, right next to the coffee. You need your own apartment, Beatrice said, her tone leaving no room for argument. You need a physical address that Sylvia cannot access. I am writing you a check for first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit. Consider it an early inheritance. I will not sit by and watch that woman consume your entire future to keep up her country club appearances. A sudden, overwhelming knot formed in my throat. I stared at the blank check. For 4 years I had worked double shifts in this basement, saving every penny for my own freedom. Julian had stolen all of it in 10 minutes. Now Beatrice was offering me a lifeline out of pure, unfiltered love. The urge to break down, to confess the federal wire fraud, the forged signature, and the hidden camera footage was agonizing. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to fall into her arms and let her carry the burden for just 1 hour. But I could not. Beatrice possessed a fierce, righteous sense of justice. If I told her Sylvia had extorted Julian to steal my $48,000 for offshore poker debts, Beatrice would not wait for Attorney Davis. She would drive her car straight to Sylvia's pristine suburban estate. She would kick the front door open and demand an immediate reckoning. Her protective anger would alert Julian. He would panic, log into his offshore holding accounts, and move the stolen capital into untraceable digital ledgers. The meticulous federal trap would disintegrate. To win the war, I had to refuse the rescue. I picked up the silver pen. I placed the cap back on with a soft click. I slid the pen and the checkbook across the metal desk, returning them to Beatrice. I cannot take your money, Aunt B, I said quietly. I appreciate it more than you know, but I have a plan. I am handling the situation. Beatrice frowned, her brow furrowed in genuine concern and mild frustration. A plan does not put a roof over your head, Azura. Pride will not protect you from Sylvia. She will keep taking until you have nothing left to give. I know exactly who she is, I replied. I kept my voice low, ensuring the dispatchers in the next cubicle could not hear. I know what Julian is doing. I just need a favor from you instead of a loan. Beatrice crossed her arms. Name it. Sylvia is throwing a bon voyage party for Julian this Saturday night, I said. All the neighbors are invited. I need you to be there. I need you to stand in the living room at 8 o'clock, and I need you to watch. Beatrice went entirely still. She studied my face. She looked past the cheap cardigan and the tired posture. She searched my eyes. She did not find the exhausted, compliant victim Sylvia had manufactured. She found something much harder. She saw the cold, calculated steel resting just beneath the surface. She recognized the quiet, terrifying patience of a woman who had already secured a total victory and was merely waiting for the clock to run out. A slow, grim understanding settled over Beatrice's features. She did not ask for details. She did not push for the mechanics of my plan. She simply reached out and placed her warm hand over mine. I will wear my best dress, Beatrice said. I will be front and center. She stood up, picked up her handbag, and turned toward the door. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Do not miss Azura. When you swing at the king, you must not miss.
I am not aiming for the king, I said. I am burning the entire castle. Beatrice offered a tight, proud smile and walked out of the logistics center. The heavy fire door sealed shut behind her. The rest of the afternoon stretched into an endless cycle of vendor calls and shipping delays. I operated on pure adrenaline. I drank the coffee Beatrice had brought me. It tasted like strength. I checked the clock on my computer monitor every 15 minutes. At exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, my personal cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored the glowing red light on my office phone and stepped into the empty supply closet down the hall. I closed the door and answered the call. "Speak," I said. Attorney Sterling Davis cleared his throat on the other end of the line. The background noise of his law firm was absent. He was calling from a secure line. "We secured the signature," Davis announced. His gravelly voice held a note of dark triumph. The federal magistrate reviewed the video files and the bank ledgers. He signed the ex parte injunction 10 minutes ago. The asset freeze is officially in the system. Julian's accounts, Sylvia's accounts, and all affiliated credit lines will be electronically locked at 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. I leaned against the wire shelving of the supply closet. A profound, heavy relief washed over me. The legal labyrinth had been navigated. "What about the World Cup tickets?" I asked. "Frozen," Davis replied. "The vendor cannot process the final seating upgrades. Julian will not receive a single notification until the bank formally mails the seizure letters next week. Right now, he thinks he is a millionaire. On Saturday night, his debit cards will decline, just like yours did at the gas pump." The trap was primed. The explosive charges were set under the foundation of Sylvia's pristine suburban life. My new conflict was no longer a matter of gathering evidence. It was a matter of execution. I had to survive 5 more days in the wolf's den, smiling through the preparations for Julian's lavish farewell party, knowing I held the detonator in my pocket. The digital clock on my car dashboard read 8:15 in the evening. The federal banking freeze had executed exactly 4 hours and 15 minutes ago. I parked my tired sedan at the very end of the street, far away from the line of imported luxury SUVs and sleek black sedans crowding Sylvia's expansive driveway. The winter air was crisp and biting, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and impending snow. I sat behind the steering wheel for a long moment, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the cooling engine. The engine noise was the only sound in my isolated world. Down the street, Sylvia's house blazed with golden light, looking like a glowing beacon of wealth and success. I did not change my clothes. I wore the same faded blue medical scrubs I had worn for my 12-hour Saturday shift. A faint brownish stain of iodine marked the hem of my tunic. My white sneakers were scuffed and worn down at the heels. Attorney Davis had told me to play my role until the very last second. My role was the exhausted, overlooked beast of burden. The visual contrast was going to be my first weapon. I walked up the long brick pathway. A hired valet in a dark winter coat offered a polite, confused nod as I bypassed his podium. Faint jazz music drifted through the thick glass of the front windows. A professional trio playing upright bass piano and soft brushes on a snare drum. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The heat of the foyer hit my face, carrying the rich, savory aroma of catered beef tenderloin and expensive floral arrangements. The house was overflowing with people. Neighbors wrapped in velvet blazers, extended relatives wearing tailored cocktail dresses, and local business owners holding crystal flutes filled with sparkling wine. It was a curated audience designed to worship Julian and validate Sylvia. I stepped into the entryway. Conversations near the door faltered. Eyes flicked toward my wrinkled hospital scrubs, then quickly darted away in polite embarrassment. I was a stark, jarring disruption to the carefully manicured aesthetic of the farewell party. Sylvia materialized from the crowd almost instantly. She wore a stunning emerald green silk dress, her hair pinned up in a flawless, intricate twist. Her smile was bright and dazzling for the guests, but the moment she reached my side, her eyes turned into hard, unyielding flint.
She clamped her manicured hand around my bicep, her acrylic nails digging sharply into my skin. "What are you doing?" Sylvia hissed, her voice a fierce, frantic whisper meant only for my ears. "I told you to wear the black cocktail dress. You look like a vagrant. You are embarrassing the family." "I just finished a shift, Mom," I said. My voice was a flat, calm lake. "I came straight here to say goodbye to my brother." "You could have changed in the staff locker room," Sylvia snapped, pulling my arm in the direction of the kitchen hallway. "Go through the pantry. Hide in the kitchen. The caterers need help plating the miniature crab cakes. You can stay back there and manage the staff. Do not come out here and ruin the aesthetic of Julian's send-off. The president of the country club is standing by the fireplace." She tried to physically shove me toward the swinging kitchen door. I planted my worn sneakers firmly onto the hardwood floor. I locked my knees. I did not move a single inch. Sylvia stopped pushing. She looked at me, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her features. I had never resisted her physical direction before. I always yielded to keep the peace. I gently reached up and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. "I am not plating crab cakes," I said softly. "I am going to see Julian." I stepped past her, leaving her standing frozen in the foyer, and walked directly into the grand living room. The crowd parted slightly, giving the woman in the dirty scrubs a wide berth. Julian was holding court by the massive stone fireplace. He looked like an advertisement for aristocratic leisure. He wore a bespoke navy velvet jacket over a crisp white shirt, the top two buttons undone, to project effortless charm. He held a tall glass of amber liquor over a single, perfectly spherical ice cube. Bianca stood closely at his side, draped in a backless silver gown, nodding enthusiastically at whatever lie he was currently spinning. "The VIP suite at the stadium is just the entry point," Julian boasted to a circle of wealthy neighbors. His voice carried over the soft jazz music, loud and dripping with unearned hubris. "The real networking happens at the private dinners on the Mediterranean coast. I secured an Aston Martin rental for the coastal drive. You have to speak the language of capital to these European investors. You cannot show up looking hungry. You have to arrive looking like you already own the table." The dramatic irony was a heavy, suffocating blanket over the room. I stopped 10 feet away from his circle. I knew something he did not. I knew that at 4 o'clock this afternoon, the federal banking system had dropped a digital guillotine on his life. I knew that the debit card sitting inside his tailored jacket was currently a useless piece of plastic. I knew the vendor for the Aston Martin rental was receiving a hard decline on the security deposit. He was standing in a room full of millionaires bragging about a fortune while holding less liquid capital than the valet parking cars outside. I scanned the room. Aunt Beatrice stood near the grand piano. She wore a regal, deep purple dress that commanded respect. She held a glass of sparkling water. She caught my eye across the crowded room. She took note of my faded scrubs, the quiet defiance in my posture, and the heavy canvas tote bag hanging from my shoulder. Beatrice offered a single, microscopic nod of solidarity. She was ready. In the far corner, near the bay window, Grandpa Harrison sat in his motorized wheelchair. He was dressed in a neat tweed suit. His eyes were wide open, alert, and tracking every movement in the room. I took 3 slow, deliberate steps to my right. I positioned my body in the exact center of the open floor space. I adjusted my angle until I was standing directly in the crosshairs of the antique oak bookshelf. I knew the tiny blinking blue light of the hidden camera was capturing my profile. I wanted every second of this execution documented on a high-definition local storage drive. Julian finished his story, drawing a round of appreciative laughter from the wealthy neighbors. He turned his head and finally noticed me standing there. His arrogant smile widened. He saw my faded hospital uniform and interpreted it as a visual confirmation of my lower status. He thought I had shown up to beg for scraps. Julian raised his glass of amber liquor high into the air. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," Julian announced. His booming voice cut through the ambient chatter. The jazz trio politely stopped playing. The room fell into a sudden, expectant hush. Faces turned toward the fireplace.
Julian gestured toward me with his glass. My sister Azura just arrived straight from the hospital. Her dedication to her job is inspiring. But more importantly, her dedication to this family is the foundation of my current venture. I want to make a toast to family resources, to shared visions, and to the incredible generosity that makes building a legacy possible. The neighbors offered a polite smattering of applause. Bianca smiled a hollow, glossy smile. Sylvia hovered near the edge of the crowd, her face pale with anxiety over my outfit, praying I would just nod and retreat to the shadows. Julian looked at me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. He expected me to lower my head. He expected a tearful, subservient goodbye speech wishing him well on his fraudulent European vacation. He expected the compliant beast of burden to carry his lie past the finish line. I reached out and picked up a heavy crystal water goblet from a passing waiter's silver tray. I pulled a polished silver spoon from my scrub pocket. I raised the goblet. I struck the side of the glass with the metal spoon. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp ringing sound pierced the silence of the room. It was not a polite dinner bell. It was a gavel striking wood. The remaining murmurs in the crowd died instantly. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto me. "Thank you for that beautiful toast, Julian," I said. My voice was a calm, chilling breeze. It carried easily to the back of the room. Family generosity is a fascinating concept. Julian's smirk faltered slightly. His eyes narrowed. He recognized a shift in my tone, a sudden absence of the fear he had relied on for 32 years. I did not break eye contact with him. I reached my left hand into the deep pocket of my canvas tote bag. My fingers brushed past my car keys and my stethoscope. I found the thick, heavy manila envelope waiting at the bottom. I pulled the envelope out into the bright chandelier light. The paper was thick and unbending. It held 70 pages of printed banking ledgers, sworn affidavits, printed IP network logs, and a signed copy of a federal ex parte injunction. The physical weight of the envelope anchored me to the floor. The new conflict hovering in the air was palpable. The audience held their breath, waiting for the first word of my speech. Julian lowered his glass, his knuckles turning white around the crystal. The trap had closed, the locks were sealed, and the execution was officially underway. I held the thick manila envelope in my left hand. The paper felt rough against my skin. 50 pairs of wealthy, judgmental eyes stared at me, waiting for a punchline or an apology. I offered neither. My voice remained steady-pitched at a clinical, terrifying calm. It was the same tone I used when coordinating emergency trauma transfers. Generosity is an easy virtue to claim when you are spending stolen capital, I said. 3 days ago, Julian initiated a fraudulent wire transfer. He drained my personal savings account to fund his European networking vacation. $48,000. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the front row of guests. The president of the local country club frowned, shifting his weight uneasily. Julian threw his head back and laughed. It was a rich, practiced sound. He had spent his entire life charming his way out of consequences. From wrecked sports cars in high school to defaulted business loans in his 20s, his handsome smile always functioned as a get-out-of-jail-free card. He assumed this moment was no different. "Azura, please," Julian chuckled, looking around the room to gather his audience. He held his hands up in a placating gesture. "You are being incredibly dramatic. We discussed this. Family does not hide money from each other. It is an investment in our collective future. You leave capital dormant in a low-yield checking account while I am out here building a legacy. We share resources. That is how dynasties survive." He looked at the crowd, inviting them to agree with his distorted logic. A few neighbors offered uncertain, tight smiles. Sylvia stood near the hallway, her emerald silk dress shimmering, and she took a hesitant step forward, preparing to intervene and silence me. I did not engage in a debate. Arguing with a narcissist in front of an audience only feeds their ego. Facts do not require shouting. I reached into my scrub pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped down on the cracked screen and tapped the icon for wireless screen mirroring. Directly behind Julianne, mounted above the grand stone fireplace, hung a 65-inch smart television.
Sylvia used it to display digital art during parties. A loud electronic chime echoed through the living room as my phone paired with the display. Julian stopped smiling. He turned his head, looking over his shoulder at the blank black screen. I tapped the play button on my device. The high-definition hidden camera footage from 3 days ago illuminated the dim room. The built-in microphone was engineered to capture whispered conversations, and now, connected to Sylvia's premium surround sound system, the audio boomed across the cocktail party with devastating clarity. The video showed the exact room we were standing in. It showed Julian pacing in his tailored suit, holding a folder. It showed Sylvia sitting on the linen sofa sipping white wine. "The wire is pending," the digital version of Julian announced through the speakers. "The funds will hit my offshore holding account in 2 hours. 48,000. The live Julian froze. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. He took a staggering step away from the fireplace, staring at the television as if it were a ghost. The teller did not ask questions, the digital Sylvia asked on screen. "I went to the commercial desk," digital Julian bragged, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "I handed them the notarized wire transfer authorization form. It is a bulletproof document. I traced Azura's signature using the backlight of my tablet. It took me 10 minutes to perfect the loop of her letter A. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the 50 guests. The jazz trio had long since packed away their instruments. The affluent neighbors, the country club president, the extended relatives, they all stood paralyzed. Forgery. It was not a misunderstanding over shared resources. It was a calculated, premeditated crime. Julian opened his mouth to speak, to offer some desperate spin, but the video kept playing. The truth was relentless. On the screen, Sylvia set her wine glass down. Her soft maternal facade vanished. "Send 20,000 to my private checking account." Digital Julian flinched. "Mom, we agreed on 10. The venture capital suite costs 15 alone. If I give you 20, my margins are too thin." "Your margins are not my concern," digital Sylvia snapped, leaning forward like a predator. "I need 20,000 to cover my markers. The offshore poker sites are threatening to initiate a collection protocol against the house deed. I have been losing heavy on the digital tables for 3 months. You will send me $20,000 today, or I will call Azura right now and tell her exactly what you did." The illusion of the flawless matriarch shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Sylvia spent decades curating a reputation of aristocratic grace. She sat on charity boards and hosted exclusive galas. She looked down on anyone who carried debt. Now, her most closely guarded secret was broadcast in high definition to the exact social circle she was terrified of losing. She was exposed as a severe gambling addict who extorted her own son to steal from her daughter. A sharp, explosive crack pierced the quiet room. Bianca stood near the edge of the fireplace. Her jaw hung slack. Her fingers had gone entirely numb. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the polished hardwood floor. Shards of glass and sparkling wine sprayed across the toes of her suede boots. She stared at Julian, her chest heaving in panicked, shallow breaths. She realized the chestnut leather luggage, the designer gowns, and the impending European vacation were all funded by wire fraud. She was married to a felon, and the evidence was playing on a loop. In the center of the crowd, Aunt Beatrice stood tall in her purple dress. She did not gasp. She did not whisper to her neighbors. She simply crossed her arms over her chest and offered a slow, grim nod of profound satisfaction. She had warned me that Sylvia was a parasite. Now, the entire neighborhood knew the diagnosis. Sylvia brought a trembling hand up to her mouth. She gasped a weak, hollow sound that barely escaped her throat. She looked around the room, making panicked eye contact with the country club president, hoping for a lifeline. He slowly turned his back on her, setting his drink down on a side table. Social death is swift in these circles. Once the veneer of wealth is exposed as a criminal liability, the herd scatters. I looked at Julian. The arrogant prince of the estate was gone. His broad shoulders hunched inward. His expensive velvet jacket suddenly looked like a cheap costume. The bravado evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, hollow shell of a man who finally understood that his charm could not alter digital reality. The indisputable logic of the video stripped away every lie he ever told. He had no defense. He had no counter-argument. I pressed the pause button on my phone. The screen froze on Sylvia's sneering face. The sudden silence in the living room was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. The execution was flawless, but the trap was only half sprung. The digital evidence destroyed their reputation, but the legal machinery I had set in motion with Attorney Davis was about to destroy their freedom. The frozen image of Sylvia glaring from the television screen cast a harsh light over the silent living room. Nobody dared to breathe. The ambient hum of the central heating system sounded like a roaring engine. Julian stood paralyzed by the fireplace, his mouth opened and closed, searching for a lie that could overwrite digital reality. He found nothing. The aristocratic armor he wore so proudly had melted into cheap fabric. Before he could formulate a single syllable, the front doorbell chimed. The two-note melody echoed through the foyer. In any other context, it would signal the arrival of another wealthy guest. Tonight, it sounded like a funeral toll. The heavy oak door swung inward. The hired valet stood awkwardly on the threshold, holding the brass handle. Behind him stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a beige windbreaker and sensible rubber-soled shoes. He carried a thick stack of legal documents clipped inside a blue presentation folder. He did not care about the cocktail dresses or the crystal chandeliers. He was a professional courier executing a federal mandate. The courier stepped into the grand living room, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of the affluent crowd. He spotted the velvet jacket and the desperate, cornered expression. He walked straight toward the fireplace. The wealthy neighbors parted instantly, creating a wide aisle. They wanted no proximity to the impending disaster. Social contagion is a genuine fear among the elite. The man stopped 2 feet away from my brother. "Julian Wilson?" the courier asked. His tone held the bored efficiency of a municipal worker. Julian nodded, a slow, mechanical tilt of his chin. His vocal cords seemed paralyzed. "You are served," the man said. He thrust the thick blue folder against Julian's chest. Julian reflexively brought his hands up to catch the papers before they fell. The courier turned around and walked out the front door without another word. The heavy oak slammed shut behind him. Julian stared at the blue folder in his hands as if it were a venomous snake. He did not open it. He lacked the courage to read the dense legal typography. "Those are federal injunctions," I said. My voice sliced through the tension, cold and precise. Attorney Sterling Davis filed them this morning. A federal magistrate signed the ex parte orders after reviewing your video confession. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the banking system executed a hard freeze. Every checking account, every savings ledger, and every line of credit attached to your Social Security number is locked tight. Julian dropped the folder onto the coffee table. The heavy thud made Bianca flinch. He scrambled for his smartphone, his thumbs shaking uncontrollably. He opened his banking application, desperate to prove me wrong, desperate to see his offshore holding balances intact. I watched his eyes track across the glowing screen. The color drained from his face a second time, leaving him an ashen white. A bright red banner stretched across his digital banking dashboard. Account suspended. Please contact the Federal Fraud Division. You are under formal investigation for wire fraud. I continued pacing my words to ensure every guest heard the charges clearly. The magistrate also reviewed the footage of you taking cash from Grandpa Harrison's wallet. You are facing an additional indictment for elder abuse. That specific charge carries a mandatory sentencing enhancement. Furthermore, your passport has been flagged by the State Department. If you attempt to board your flight to Europe tomorrow, customs agents will detain you at the departure gate. Julian dropped his phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor, sliding to a stop near the puddle of spilled champagne. He had no money. He had no escape route. The venture capital suite, the Aston Martin rental, the Mediterranean dinners, all of it evaporated into thin air. Bianca stared at the dropped phone. her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure horror. The realization hit her with the force of a speeding freight train. She married Julian for his supposed wealth and his upward trajectory. She funded her entire identity through his credit limits. Now she was legally tethered to a penniless criminal facing federal prison time. "You lied to me," Bianca shrieked. The sound was raw, high-pitched, and entirely devoid of her usual polished grace. She pointed a trembling finger at his face. "You told me you earned that money. You told me the venture capitalists were begging for your input. You dragged me into a felony. My designer luggage, my clothes, my reputation. The authorities are going to seize everything." Julian raised his hands, trying to calm her. "Bianca, sweetheart, please lower your voice. We can hire a defense attorney. We can fix this." "Fix it with what?" Bianca screamed, her voice cracking. "Your accounts are frozen. You are broke. You stole from your own sister, and you were stupid enough to do it on camera. I am not going to prison for you." She turned around, ignoring the staring neighbors. She grabbed her expensive trench coat from a nearby chair and stormed toward the front door. Her suede boots crunched over the broken glass of her shattered champagne flute. She did not look back. The front door opened and slammed shut again. Julian's marriage dissolved in less than 60 seconds. The guests began to shuffle backward. The country club president muttered an excuse to his wife and headed for the exit. The rest of the neighborhood elite followed suit, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the Wilson family implosion. They left their half-empty glasses on antique tables and practically sprinted for the valet stand. Sylvia watched her social kingdom crumble. Her neighbors, the people she spent decades trying to impress, abandoned her without a single word of sympathy. The shame was a physical weight. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into a plush velvet armchair near the hallway. She buried her face in her hands. Deep, racking sobs shook her shoulders. She was not crying out of guilt for stealing my life savings. She was not crying because her son was facing a federal indictment. She wept because the family name was ruined. Her prestige, her country club standing, and her pristine aristocratic image were gone forever. I walked across the room, my worn white sneakers moving silently over the expensive Persian rug. I stopped right in front of her armchair. I looked down at the top of her intricate, flawless hairstyle. Sylvia slowly lowered her hands. Her makeup was ruined, dark streaks of mascara running down her pale cheeks. She looked up at me, expecting mercy. She expected the compliant daughter to kneel beside her and offer comfort. I kept my spine straight. I did not offer a hand. "You hide money from family. That makes you selfish," I said, my tone echoing the exact weapon she used against me days earlier. "You steal it. That makes you a felon." Sylvia squeezed her eyes shut, letting out a fresh wail of despair. I turned my back on her. I walked away from the weeping matriarch and the paralyzed brother. I crossed the empty living room toward the bay window. Grandpa Harrison sat in his wheelchair. He watched the entire scene unfold with intense, focused satisfaction. The guests had fled. The predators were declawed. The house was finally quiet, save for Sylvia's pathetic sobbing. I stopped in front of him. I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out the small piece of folded paper he had slipped into my pocket 3 days ago. The paper with the camera network address. I held it up so he could see it. Harrison looked at the paper. Then he looked up at my face. He did not smile. A smile would have cheapened the gravity of the victory. Instead, he lowered his chin in a slow, firm, and profoundly proud nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of a battle fought and won. I gripped the rubber handles of his wheelchair. "Let us go home," I whispered. I turned the chair around and pushed him toward the front door. I did not look at Julian. I did not look at Sylvia. I pushed Harrison over the threshold and out into the crisp, freezing New Hampshire night. The icy air filled my lungs, tasting incredibly clean. The extraction was a success, but walking out of the house was only the first step. The true fallout of their financial crimes would begin the next morning, and the legal system is a slow, unforgiving machine. I had to secure Harrison's safety in a new environment, while the federal investigators began dissecting the ruins of Sylvia's estate. The war was over, but the cleanup had just begun.
The front door clicked shut, sealing the last fleeing guest outside.
The sudden silence inside the sprawling estate was heavier than the noise had been. The catered farewell party resembled the aftermath of a natural disaster. Half-eaten miniature crab cakes dried out on silver platters. Abandoned crystal flutes left wet rings on antique mahogany end tables. The elite social circle of the neighborhood had treated the residents like a quarantine zone, escaping the infectious ruin of a federal indictment.
Sylvia remained slumped in the velvet armchair.
The narrative of her pristine, aristocratic life had burned down to ash in under 10 minutes. The neighbors who used to envy her manicured gardens and imported decor would now whisper about her gambling addiction and extortion at the country club. Yet the deep-rooted instinct for self-preservation began to twitch beneath her shock. She wiped the smeared mascara from her cheeks with the back of her trembling hand. If Julian went to prison, she would lose her primary shield. She needed to fund his defense. She needed to secure him a flight out of the state before federal agents knocked on the heavy oak door.
She reached into the pocket of her emerald silk dress and retrieved her smartphone. Her manicured fingers slipped against the smooth glass. She navigated to her primary banking portal, bypassing the checking ledger she shared with Julian, and accessed her private savings. It was an emergency reserve, a hidden pool of capital she kept for sudden liquidity crises. She initiated a transfer interface, preparing to route $30,000 to a secure prepaid debit account Julian could use to vanish. She tapped the confirmation button. A spinning loading icon appeared.
Sylvia held her breath, watching the circular animation. The screen flashed red. A stark, unyielding notification block materialized over her financial dashboard. Your accounts are currently suspended pursuant to a federal injunction. Please contact the branch manager or the Federal Fraud Division during regular business hours for further information.
The phone dropped from her hand, bouncing softly onto the thick Persian rug.
The psychological devastation settled into her bones, cold and total. She had commingled the $20,000 of extorted, stolen money with her legitimate savings. The federal freeze did not merely target Julian. Attorney Davis had drafted the injunction to capture every ledger touched by the fraudulent wire transfer. The financial snare had wrapped around her entire existence. She could not buy groceries. She could not pay the impending electric bill. She was a captive in a mansion she could no longer afford.
Down the hallway, I ignored the sound of Sylvia whimpering in the dark. I pushed Grandpa Harrison into his ground floor bedroom. The space smelled of old paper and the sharp medicinal tang of his heart prescriptions. I moved with quiet efficiency. I grabbed a worn canvas duffel bag from the closet shelf. I did not pack the room. I only packed the essentials. I gathered his plastic daily pill organizers, a stack of vintage flannel shirts, a heavy wool cardigan, and a framed silver photograph of my late father. Harrison watched me from his wheelchair. He did not ask questions. He understood the extraction required speed. During the 5 days I spent pretending to be the compliant, broken daughter, I had not just secured legal injunctions. I had secured a future. Attorney Davis utilized a specific trust provision to separate Harrison from Sylvia's toxic guardianship. We redirected his monthly veteran pension into a protected, independent ledger. I had already signed a lease on a premium assisted living suite located 3 towns over. The facility featured around-the-clock medical supervision, private landscaped gardens, and a strict visitor protocol that permanently barred Julian and Sylvia from entry. Harrison was trading a lonely corner in a house of thieves for a sunlit room filled with dignity. I zipped the canvas duffel bag shut. I slung the heavy strap over my shoulder and grabbed the rubber grips of the wheelchair. "Ready?" I asked softly. Harrison gave a single, firm nod. I pushed the chair out of the bedroom and back down the long hallway toward the foyer. The grand living room was dark, save for the ambient glow of the outdoor landscape lights filtering through the bay windows. Julian stood blocking the front door. His velvet jacket was unbuttoned,
hanging loosely off his shoulders. His hair, usually styled into effortless perfection, stuck up in chaotic tufts where he had run his hands through it in blind panic. The arrogant prince had transformed into a cornered, desperate animal. He glared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You think you can just walk out?" Julian snarled. His voice cracked, losing the smooth, practiced resonance he used to charm venture capitalists. "I am going to sue you, Azura. I am going to file a defamation lawsuit for that little video stunt. I will drag you into civil court. I will hire the most ruthless litigator in New England and tie you up in depositions for the next 10 years. I will make sure you spend every dime of your miserable hospital salary defending yourself." I stopped the wheelchair 5 feet away from him. I did not flinch at the empty threat. I looked at him with the clinical detachment of a triage nurse assessing a terminal patient. "Lawyers require a retainer, Julian." I stated, my tone devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "Ruthless litigators bill at $600 an hour. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your credit cards will decline at a fast food drive-thru. You do not have the capital to hire a parking attendant, let alone a defense attorney. The only legal counsel you will receive is an overworked public defender appointed by the state." The raw logic of my words hit him like a physical blow. The bluster evaporated. He opened his mouth, searching for another threat, another angle, but the reality of his destitution stripped him of his ammunition. Footsteps echoed against the hardwood floor. Aunt Beatrice emerged from the shadows of the living room. She wore her regal purple dress like a suit of armor. She stepped up beside me, her presence a silent, imposing shield. She did not say a single word to Julian. She did not need to. Her fierce, uncompromising gaze pinned him to the heavy oak door. She possessed the moral authority of a matriarch who had never compromised her integrity, and Julian withered under her stare. He stepped aside. He pressed his back against the wall, yielding the exit. I pushed the wheelchair forward. Beatrice reached out and pulled the heavy front door open. We stepped out onto the brick pathway. The crisp, clean New Hampshire winter air filled my lungs, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles and frost. The stars shone brilliantly above the dark silhouette of the suburban neighborhood. I guided Harrison down the sloping driveway toward my waiting sedan. Beatrice walked closely at my side, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic cadence against the pavement. The heavy canvas duffel bag bumped against my hip. We reached the car, and Beatrice helped me lift Harrison smoothly into the passenger seat. I folded the wheelchair and stored it in the trunk. "Drive safe, Azura," Beatrice said, resting a warm hand on my shoulder. "I will handle the real estate agents when the bank forecloses on that house." "Thank you, Aunt Bee," I replied. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater roared to life, blowing warm air across my cold hands. I shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the glowing, toxic estate in the rearview mirror. The extraction was a total success. I had retrieved my grandfather, exposed the rot, and secured the asset freeze. But the justice system is a mechanical beast with its own momentum. As I drove down the winding dark roads toward the assisted living facility, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. A message from Attorney Davis illuminated the cabin. The federal investigators were not waiting until Monday morning. A tactical financial crimes unit was currently mobilizing. Julian's desperate hubris was about to collide with the sterile, unforgiving reality of a federal interrogation room, and a man with nothing left to lose is always the most dangerous variable in the equation. 2 days passed in a blur of sterile hospital air and relentless supply chain manifests. Monday morning brought a bitter frost that coated the New Hampshire windows in thick white ice. I sat at my metal desk inside the windowless logistics bunker. The harsh overhead lighting hummed a steady, irritating note. My secure, encrypted phone chimed, vibrating against a stack of shipping invoices. Attorney Sterling Davis had sent a compressed digital dossier. The file contained preliminary arraignment transcripts and asset forfeiture reports. Reading the dense bureaucratic language, the vivid reality of my brother's downfall materialized in my mind. Julian sat inside a stark, windowless federal interrogation room in downtown Concord. The physical environment was engineered to strip away comfort and project unyielding authority. The stainless steel table bolted to the concrete floor offered zero warmth. The air conditioning blew a steady stream of frigid air from a rusted ceiling vent. For his entire adult life, Julian relied on bespoke tailoring, expensive haircuts, and curated aesthetics to command respect. Today, he wore an ill-fitting orange detention uniform. The coarse cotton fabric scratched the skin of his neck. His hands were secured to a heavy metal ring embedded in the table. He lacked the liquid capital to hire the ruthless private litigators he had threatened me with during the farewell party. Instead, he was flanked by an overworked public defender named Gregson. Gregson wore a wrinkled polyblend shirt and a cheap, fraying necktie. The attorney kept checking his scuffed wristwatch, his eyes weighed down by dark bags, clearly exhausted from managing 90 other indigent cases. Gregson did not care about Julian's imaginary venture capital firm or his aristocratic delusions. He only cared about processing the paperwork before his next hearing. Julian attempted to deploy his usual charm. The transcripts detailed his frantic effort to control the narrative. 2 seasoned federal investigators sat across from him, Agent Klein and Agent Torres. They wore crisp, dark suits and maintained expressions of bored skepticism. Julian tried to spin the story into a mere domestic misunderstanding. He weaponized his polished vocabulary, hoping to confuse the agents with corporate jargon. This is a familial dispute regarding shared resources. Julian insisted, his recorded words transcribed in stark black text on my screen. My sister and my mother maintain a joint ledger. Sylvia authorized the withdrawal. I was simply executing a financial pivot under my mother's direct supervision. If there is a discrepancy in the paperwork, it falls on the banking institution or Sylvia's miscommunication. I am an entrepreneur, not a thief. We share assets. That is how our family operates. He painted the woman who spent decades coddling him as the primary architect of the crime. When cornered, Julian threw his own mother straight under the judicial bus without a second of hesitation. He smiled at the agents, a tight, desperate curving of his lips, assuming the bureaucratic machine would stall out on a messy family dynamic. Agent Torres did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply reached into her dark suit jacket and produced a sleek black digital tablet. She placed it flat on the cold metal table and slid it across the stainless steel surface. The device stopped inches from Julian's restrained hands. Agent Klein reached forward and tapped the screen. The tablet illuminated Julian's face. It was the high-definition hidden camera footage from Grandpa Harrison's living room. The volume was turned up, the audio sharp and uncompromising. Julian watched himself pace across the Persian rug in his velvet jacket. He watched his digital counterpart brag to Sylvia about the fraudulent mechanics of the theft. I traced Azura's signature using the backlight of my tablet, the recorded voice echoed off the cinder block walls of the interrogation room. It took me 10 minutes to perfect the loop of her letter A. Then I gave the suspended notary $500 to stamp the authorization. The ironclad evidence filled the tiny room. The indisputable logic of the video stripped away every lie Julian had just spoken. He stared at the glowing screen, his jaw hanging slack. His throat worked convulsively, trying to swallow the panic rising in his chest. The color vanished from his cheeks. Gregson, the exhausted public defender, sighed heavily. He dragged a hand down his tired face and closed his yellow legal pad. He leaned close to Julian and whispered a harsh command. Do not say another word. You are invoking your right to remain silent right now. They have you dead to rights. The labyrinth of the justice system closed its heavy iron doors, locking Julian inside a cage constructed entirely of his own hubris. While Julian sat frozen in federal custody, his meticulously curated domestic life imploded with spectacular speed. Davis attached a secondary civil report to the dossier I was reading. Bianca did not wait for the ink to dry on the arrest warrant. She possessed a predatory survival instinct. She hired an aggressive family law attorney and filed an emergency petition for divorce at 9 o'clock that morning. She legally severed herself from his sinking ship, citing profound financial deception and criminal endangerment. She wanted to preserve whatever pristine credit score she had left and avoid being named as a co-conspirator.
However, Bianca could not outrun the asset forfeiture protocols. The dossier outlined the ruthless execution of the property seizure. A tactical recovery team arrived at the luxury apartment Julian leased under a fake corporate entity. The repo agents carried a federal mandate to confiscate any goods purchased with illicit funds. The Chekhov gun fired with brutal, satisfying precision. Bianca was in the middle of packing her belongings when the heavy boots of the recovery team breached the unit. They ignored her theatrical tears and her frantic screams. The agents moved with methodical efficiency. They seized the chestnut leather designer luggage she had flaunted in Sylvia's foyer just days prior. They confiscated the matching cosmetic cases, the imported watches, the tailored trench coats, and the electronics. They stripped the apartment of every single luxury item funded by my stolen medical logistics salary. Bianca threatened to call the police. The lead agent handed her a copy of the federal seizure warrant and continued carrying the $12,000 luggage set out the front door. She was left standing in a cavernous, empty living room, holding a useless set of keys to an apartment she could no longer afford. Back in the Stark interrogation room, Julian remained isolated. The investigators left him alone to let the reality of his situation simmer. The concrete walls pressed inward. He possessed a terrifying abundance of time to reflect on his choices. He realized his charm was entirely powerless against a federal prosecutor holding a digital confession. More devastatingly, a dark psychological truth finally settled into his bones. Sylvia's toxic enabling had destroyed his life. For 32 years, our mother shielded him from every minor consequence. She taught him that rules did not apply to the golden child. She nurtured his arrogance and fed his delusions of grandeur. Ultimately, she demanded he steal my savings to cover her offshore poker debts, pushing him directly into federal jurisdiction. Her relentless, suffocating coddling paved a direct, unavoidable highway to a grand jury indictment. The mother who promised him the world had handed him a prison sentence. I closed the digital dossier on my computer monitor. A profound, icy peace settled over my shoulders. I leaned back in my cheap office chair. Julian was neutralized. The fraudulent prince was dethroned. Bianca was a ghost, banished from the narrative. The stolen funds were slowly being untangled by federal accountants. But the equation remained unbalanced. The architect of the misery still required her reckoning. Sylvia still sat in her sprawling suburban mansion, hiding behind closed curtains, waiting for a rescue that would never arrive. My encrypted phone vibrated against the metal desk. The screen lit up with a new notification. A voicemail icon pulsed in the center of the glass. The caller identification displayed Sylvia's home phone number. She was reaching out. The silence of her ruined kingdom had become too loud to bear. I stared at the glowing device, knowing her trembling voice would signal the start of a desperate, final campaign to save herself. I pressed the speaker icon on my encrypted smartphone. The audio file loaded. The sterile concrete walls of the hospital logistics bunker provided a cold backdrop to the sheer desperation echoing from the device. Sylvia did not lead with a command. The haughty, aristocratic cadence she had weaponized my entire life was absent. Instead, a ragged, wet sob filled the small room. "Azra, please," my mother pleaded. Her voice trembled, cracking under the weight of her newly minted destitution. "You have to call the lawyers off. The bank sent a man to tape a notice to the front door. They are initiating foreclosure proceedings. The offshore poker site sold my debt to a collection agency, and my phone rings every 10 minutes. I have no heat. They shut off the gas yesterday. Julian will not answer his calls from the detention center. You are the only one left. I raised you. You cannot let me freeze in this house. Please, Azra, I am begging you." The recording ended with a pathetic gasp. The screen went dark. My chest tightened. A heavy, familiar stone dropped into the bottom of my stomach. The lifelong conditioning flared up a physiological response ingrained over decades of emotional subservience. My hands shook. The instinct to fix her mess, to call Attorney Davis and halt the injunction, screamed in my ears. I envisioned her sitting in the freezing dark, draped in her emerald silk dress, shivering. I hovered my thumb over the callback button.
Then I remembered the high-definition video. I remembered her cold, calculating face as she demanded $20,000 of my stolen labor to cover her digital card games. I remembered her telling Julian to use my loyalty to keep me compliant. The pity evaporated, replaced by the sterile, cleansing light of truth. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was the architect of her own ruin. I swiped left on the audio file. I pressed the red trash icon. Deleted. I did not block her number. I let the voicemails pile up over the next 3 weeks, a digital graveyard of her sinking kingdom. I listened to each one once, analyzing the descent from manipulation to bargaining and finally to pure, unfiltered panic. And then I deleted every single one. I refused to throw a life preserver to the woman who drilled holes in my boat. The winter dragged on, burying New Hampshire under thick layers of snow. The sprawling suburban estate, once a beacon of neighborhood envy, rapidly deteriorated. Without my stolen medical logistics salary subsidizing the utility bills, the house turned into an icy tomb. Sylvia could not afford a landscaping service. The long, pristine driveway disappeared beneath 2 feet of unplowed drifts. The opulent crystal chandelier in the grand foyer remained dark. The ultimate punishment for a woman who built her entire identity on social supremacy is erasure. The affluent neighbors, the country club board members, and the charity gala organizers excised her from their ranks with ruthless efficiency. They drove past the unplowed driveway and averted their eyes. The woman who spent her life looking down on the working class was now a pariah in her own zip code. The bank moved with predatory speed. The asset freeze mandated by the federal court left Sylvia unable to make a single mortgage payment. The offshore gambling markers decimated her credit profile. The lender initiated an expedited foreclosure, auctioning the property to recoup their losses. On a brisk Tuesday morning in late February, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb of the decaying estate. Aunt Beatrice stepped out into the freezing air. She wore a tailored wool coat in a deep charcoal gray and a pair of pristine leather gloves. She walked up the unshoveled brick pathway, her low heels leaving sharp impressions in the fresh snow. She reached the heavy oak door. The bank foreclosure notice still fluttered in the winter wind taped to the wood. Beatrice did not knock. She carried her own key. She pushed the door open and stepped into the freezing foyer. The house smelled of damp wool and stale air. Sylvia sat on the linen sofa in the living room, huddled under 3 layers of cashmere blankets. Her intricate, flawless hairstyle had unraveled into a chaotic, tangled mess. Her skin looked gray, hollowed out by weeks of isolation and terror. Sylvia looked up, her eyes widening in a brief, pathetic flash of hope. She saw the elegant African-American woman standing in her foyer and assumed a rescue mission had finally arrived. For years, Sylvia had treated Beatrice with thin, veiled racism and overt classist disdain, viewing my father's sister as an unfortunate familial obligation. Now she looked at Beatrice like a drowning sailor spotting a lighthouse. "Beatrice," Sylvia whispered, her voice a raspy shadow. She threw off the blankets and stumbled to her feet. "You came. I knew you would not abandon the family. The banks are trying to take the house. Azura refuses to answer my calls. You have to talk to her. You have to lend me the capital to clear the ledger." Beatrice stood perfectly still. She did not remove her leather gloves. She did not offer a comforting embrace. She reached into her structured handbag and withdrew a single manila folder. "I am not here to lend you money, Sylvia," Beatrice said. Her tone was a calm, unyielding glacier. It carried the weight of 30 years of silent observation. "I am here to inspect my new property." Sylvia stopped walking. The fragile hope in her eyes fractured. "Your property." Beatrice opened the folder and extracted a crisp, notarized document. The bank listed this estate at a public short sale last week. The gambling liens and the federal injunctions tanked the appraisal value. I purchased the deed with a cash offer. I secured it at a steep discount. This house belongs to me now. The air in the living room seemed to vanish. Sylvia stared at the paper in Beatrice's gloved hand. The aristocratic matriarch the woman who measured human worth by zip codes and luxury brands, had just been legally usurped by the very relative she spent decades trying to exclude from the narrative. "You bought my house?" Sylvia choked out, her knees trembling. "I bought my brother's house," Beatrice corrected, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "He built this foundation. You infected it. I am simply excising the rot to keep the equity within the bloodline." Beatrice took 2 deliberate steps forward. She held out a secondary document, a stark white sheet of paper bearing a municipal seal. "This is a formal notice to vacate," Beatrice announced, her gaze pinning Sylvia to the floorboards. "You have exactly 72 hours to pack your personal belongings and surrender the keys. If you are still inside this structure on Friday morning, I will have the county sheriff remove you for trespassing." Sylvia refused to take the paper. She backed away, shaking her head in frantic, jagged motions. "You cannot do this to me. Where am I supposed to go? I have no capital. I have no credit. My son is in a federal holding cell." "You will have to rely on your survival instincts," Beatrice replied, dropping the eviction notice onto the glass coffee table. "The same instincts you expected Azura to rely on when you allowed Julian to steal her life savings." Sylvia collapsed back onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. A long, agonizing wail tore from her throat. It was the sound of a kingdom falling. The illusion of the grand matriarch was permanently dismantled. She had sacrificed her daughter to save her status, and the universe had responded by stripping her of both. Beatrice did not linger to watch the weeping. She turned around and walked out of the freezing house, her heels clicking a steady rhythm of victory across the hardwood floor. She pulled the heavy oak door shut, leaving Sylvia alone with the ticking clock of her eviction. 30 miles away, I sat in my warm office. My phone vibrated with a brief text message from Aunt B. "The locks change on Friday. The deed is secure." I read the text twice. A profound, sweeping relief washed the tension from my neck. The parasitic architect of my misery had been excised. My grandfather was safe. My mother was evicted. The sprawling estate was out of her hands. Yet the judicial ledger still required its final balancing. While Sylvia scrambled to pack her ruined life into cardboard boxes, the federal court in Concord was preparing for Julian's sentencing hearing. The criminal justice system moved with an uncaring mechanical grind. The asset forfeiture had reclaimed the luxury goods, but the liquid capital he stole still needed to find its way back to my account. The federal prosecutor summoned me to the courthouse to deliver a victim impact statement, forcing a final confrontation with the brother who thought he could buy the world with my time. The winter snow finally yielded to a cold, relentless April rain. 4 months had passed since the night of the farewell party. The federal courthouse in downtown Concord stood as a towering monolith of gray limestone and tinted glass. It was a structure designed to make every individual walking through its heavy bronze doors feel small. I passed through the security checkpoint, placing my canvas tote bag onto the conveyor belt. The air inside the building smelled of industrial floor wax and old paper. I rode the silent elevator to the 4th floor. Attorney Sterling Davis waited for me in the corridor outside courtroom B. He wore a sharp navy suit, looking entirely in his element. He handed me a printed itinerary of the morning docket. Today was the culmination of the federal machinery. The grand jury had indicted my brother weeks ago. Faced with the high-definition video confession and the ironclad banking logs, the public defender advised his client to surrender. We stepped into the gallery. The courtroom was a theater of dark mahogany and rigid formality. Julian sat at the defense table. He did not turn around when I entered. The physical transformation was jarring. Julian built his entire adult identity on the projection of elite success. He used to spend hours researching the specific grooming habits of wealthy venture capitalists to mimic their aesthetic. Today, his tailored velvet jackets were gone. He wore a cheap, off-the-rack gray blazer that fit poorly across his slumped shoulders. His hair lacked its usual expensive styling product. He looked pale, diminished, and ordinary. The federal judge entered the room. The bailiff ordered everyone to rise. The proceedings commenced with a cold administrative efficiency that offered no room for dramatic speeches. Justice, in its final form, is merely a transaction of paperwork.
The federal prosecutor read the terms of the negotiated plea agreement into the official record. Julian would plead guilty to 1 count of federal wire fraud. The elder abuse charge regarding Grandpa Harrison was held in abeyance, used as leverage to ensure total compliance with the financial penalties. In exchange for sparing the government the cost of a trial, the prosecution recommended a sentence that avoided the maximum prison term. Julian was instructed to stand and face the magistrate. The judge looked down from the elevated bench, peering through a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses. "Mr. Wilson," the judge said, his voice echoing through the sound system, "you are admitting to utilizing forged documentation to execute an unauthorized wire transfer across state lines. Do you understand that a felony conviction for a financial crime carries permanent consequences?" "Yes, Your Honor," Julian replied. His voice was a weak, trembling whisper. The booming baritone he used to command attention at cocktail parties had vanished. The judge accepted the plea. The sentence was handed down with the swift strike of a wooden gavel. Julian received 5 years of strict federal probation. He was ordered to pay steep punitive fines to the court. More importantly, the judge mandated total restitution to the victim. The true punishment, however, was not the probation. The American corporate sector relies entirely on risk assessment and background verifications. By entering a guilty plea for federal wire fraud, Julian permanently destroyed his earning potential. No reputable financial institution, no venture capital firm, and no corporate entity would ever hire a man convicted of forging a bank authorization. His networking strategy was dead. He was officially a liability, blacklisted from the very aristocratic circles he stole my money to enter. The illusion of the successful entrepreneur was replaced by the permanent brand of a convicted felon. The hearing concluded in less than 20 minutes. The bailiff dismissed the gallery. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back at the defense table. I did not need to see his face. The ledger of justice had recorded the transaction. The criminal proceedings were only half of the battlefield. While the federal prosecutor secured the conviction, Attorney Davis operated the civil machinery to claw back the stolen capital. Julian had dispersed the $48,000 across several vendors to orchestrate his luxury European vacation. Unwinding those transactions required relentless litigation. We stood in the courthouse lobby. Davis opened his leather briefcase and handed me a final status report. "The Asset Forfeiture Division worked faster than expected," Davis explained, pointing to a column of recovered funds. "The international ticket vendor canceled the VIP World Cup suite the moment they received the federal subpoena regarding the fraudulent purchase. The vendor refunded the entire $15,000 back to the domestic holding account. The luxury car rental agency in Europe released the security deposit under similar pressure. The rest of the money, the funds Julian had planned to use for expensive dinners and networking events, had been frozen in his offshore ledger before he could spend a single dime. The federal government seized the account and routed the balance directly to the civil judgment. The final wire transfer initiated this morning, Davis said, offering a rare, genuine smile. The Treasury Department released the restitution funds. The capital is returning to its rightful owner." I thanked him, shaking his hand firmly. I walked out of the courthouse and stepped into the cool spring rain. I drove my tired sedan across town, navigating the wet streets toward the hospital. I pulled into the employee parking structure and turned off the engine. The sound of rain drumming against the metal roof created a steady, calming rhythm. I sat in the driver's seat, staring out through the windshield. The tension that had occupied my bones for 4 months began to loosen. I pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket. The screen was still cracked diagonally, a physical scar from the freezing night at the gas pump. I had opened a new checking account at a different banking institution, utilizing a complex authentication protocol that required biometric verification for every single transaction. It was an impenetrable fortress. The screen remained dark for a long moment. I listened to the rain. I focused on the steady beating of my own heart. A sharp, clear chime echoed in the quiet cabin of the car. A banner notification slid across the top of the fractured glass. Incoming domestic wire transfer, federal restitution disbursement. I opened the secure application.
The blue circle spun for a split second. The dashboard loaded.
The number centering the screen was $48,000,
the exact sum of my stolen life savings. A second line item sat beneath it, a separate deposit covering the civil penalties and the legal fees I had incurred hiring Davis. A profound, heavy relief washed over me. It felt like dropping a boulder I had been carrying up a mountain for a third of a year. The numbers on the screen were not just digital currency. They represented 4 years of my physical labor, my missed sleep, and my enduring patience. Julian had tried to erase my sacrifice to fund a weekend of unearned glory. The system had forced him to hand every single second back to me. The financial ledger was finally permanently balanced. I locked the phone and slid it back into my pocket. I started the car and drove away from the hospital, heading toward the neighboring town. Grandpa Harrison lived in a premium assisted living community surrounded by towering pine trees. The architecture mirrored a high-end resort rather than a medical facility. I signed the visitor log at the front desk and walked down the wide, carpeted hallway. I knocked twice on the door of his private suite. I pushed the door open. The room was bright and sunny. Large windows overlooked a manicured courtyard where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. Harrison sat in his comfortable recliner, a thick woven blanket resting over his lap. He wore a crisp flannel shirt. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, replaced by a calm, rested vitality. The toxic stress of Sylvia's household was gone, leaving behind a dignified peace. "Good afternoon, Azura," Harrison said. His voice was stronger than it had been in years. "Good afternoon," I replied. I walked over to the small kitchenette in the corner of the suite and turned on the electric kettle. I prepared 2 cups of Earl Grey tea, letting the rich bergamot-scented steam fill the room. I handed him a warm ceramic mug and sat down on the sofa across from him. We did not discuss the federal courthouse. We did not mention Julian or the plea agreement. We did not speak about Sylvia or the sprawling estate she had lost to Aunt Beatrice. Those people belonged to a past life, severed by the sharp edge of the law. We drank our tea in a comfortable, healing silence. I looked at the oak bookshelf resting against the far wall of his suite. Sitting on the middle shelf right next to a framed photograph of my father was the small, black security camera. It was no longer plugged into a wall socket. It was no longer hiding behind a stack of books. The tiny blue light was permanently dark. It sat out in the open, serving as a harmless paperweight. It was a silent monument to the truth. The battle was over. The stolen exit strategy was secure in my vault. Yet one final step remained. The money was never meant to sit dormant in a bank ledger. It was a ticket to a new reality. As I finished my tea, my mind shifted toward the future, ready to execute the very plan Julian had tried to destroy. 14 months passed since the gavel fell in the federal courthouse. The seasons turned, washing away the bitter winter and ushering in a long, vibrant summer, followed by a crisp autumn that painted the New Hampshire forests in gold and crimson. My life no longer operated on the razor-thin margins of exhaustion and panic. The concrete bunker in the hospital basement was a distant memory. The board of directors at Memorial Hospital recognized my meticulous efficiency during the supply chain crisis. They promoted me to the regional director of logistics. My new office sat on the 5th floor, featuring wide glass windows that overlooked the Merrimack River. The harsh fluorescent hum was replaced by natural sunlight. I no longer wore faded scrubs stained with iodine. I wore tailored charcoal trousers and crisp silk blouses. The dull ache in my lower back vanished. The dark circles under my eyes faded into a healthy, rested glow. The peace I cultivated was protected by a fortress of ironclad boundaries. Healing does not mean offering a second chance to people who tried to destroy you. It means locking the door and throwing away the key. Sylvia became a ghost, haunting the periphery of a life she no longer had access to. I blocked her phone numbers across every digital platform. When she attempted to mail handwritten letters to my new address, I wrote "Return to Sender" across the envelopes and dropped them back into the postal box without reading a single word. I felt zero guilt. She lost her sprawling estate to Aunt Beatrice and rented a small generic apartment on the edge of town, isolated from the aristocratic society she once ruled. Julian was a phantom. His felony conviction bound him to strict probation protocols. He worked a minimum wage retail job, forced to surrender a significant portion of his meager paycheck to satisfy the court-ordered fines. The arrogant prince who dreamed of venture capital suites now spent his days folding cheap denim. I never checked on him. I never looked back. The parasitic weight of their entitlement was gone. The pristine marble floor of Logan International Airport reflected the bright, sterile terminal lights. It was early Tuesday morning. The air hummed with the quiet, organized energy of international travel. The scene mirrored the exact moment my nightmare began a year ago, but the emotional context was entirely rewritten. I was not standing 30 yards away, hiding in the shadows, with a cracked phone and a broken heart. I was standing directly at the premium lounge check-in desk. I set my leather carry-on bag beside my feet. I did not buy chestnut designer trunks. I purchased practical, high-quality gear meant to last a decade. I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved my passport. The dark blue booklet felt heavy and significant in my hand. I placed it onto the polished stone counter. The ticketing agent, a polite woman in a sharp navy uniform, smiled and scanned the barcode. My chest remained perfectly still. There was no spike of anxiety. There was no fear of a declining balance or a frozen ledger. The scanner emitted a soft, pleasant chime. The monitor flashed a bright, validating green. "Your first-class boarding passes are confirmed, Ms. Wilson," the agent said, handing the documents across the counter. "You and your traveling companion have access to the priority lounge until your flight to the Mediterranean coast begins boarding." I took the thick paper tickets. I turned around to see Aunt Beatrice walking toward me. She wore a stunning cream-colored cashmere wrap and dark sunglasses projecting an aura of effortless, unbothered grace. She pulled her rolling suitcase with a relaxed grip. Over the past year, our bond had solidified into a fierce, unbreakable solidarity. She was the only family member who saw the truth and stood by my side while I dismantled the illusion. She owned the deed to the suburban estate, renting it out to a lovely young family who actually appreciated the space. We did not speak about Sylvia or Julian. We only spoke about the future. "The car service was delightfully smooth," Beatrice said, lowering her sunglasses to inspect the boarding passes in my hand. "Are we ready for the coast?" "We are ready," I replied. We were flying to the exact European destination Julian had tried to steal from me. But we were not going there to impress phantom investors or project a false aesthetic of wealth. We were going there to sit on a sunlit terrace, drink local wine, and watch the ocean. We were going there because we earned every single dollar that funded the journey. The luxury was not a grift. It was a reward for survival. We walked past the security checkpoint and entered the priority lounge. The environment was a sanctuary of quiet privilege. Thick carpets absorbed the sound of footsteps. Soft instrumental music drifted from hidden speakers. I ordered a black coffee from the barista station. The dark roast was rich and complex, a sharp contrast to the bitter, lukewarm liquid I used to drink in the hospital basement. I sat down in a plush leather armchair near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the massive commercial jets taxi across the tarmac. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a brilliant golden light over the silver wings of the airplanes. I held the warm ceramic mug in my hands. The heat seeped into my palms. I thought about the freezing sleet at the gas pump 14 months ago. I remembered the crippling terror of seeing a zero balance on a shattered screen. I remembered the suffocating weight of my mother, demanding I sacrifice my stability for her gambling debts. The contrast between that dark night and this sunlit morning was profound. The journey through the legal labyrinth had forged a new version of myself. For 32 years, I believed a very specific lie. I believed that love required silent suffering. I thought being a good daughter meant swallowing abuse to keep the peace. I thought being a loyal sister meant acting as a financial shield for a brother who refused to carry his own weight. Society conditions us to forgive toxic bloodlines, to excuse profound betrayal under the guise of family unity. We are taught that walking away is a failure of character.
The federal indictments, the frozen assets, and the quiet peace of my new life proved that narrative was a trap. Strength is not quietly absorbing abuse to keep toxic people afloat. Endurance without boundaries is just prolonged self-destruction. True strength is the unyielding, methodical enforcement of your own dignity. It is the willingness to look at the people who claim to love you, recognize their hands in your pockets, and shut the door in their faces. It is the courage to let a rotting kingdom collapse rather than offering your own bones to prop up the walls. A soft, melodic chime echoed through the premium lounge. The digital departure board updated. A polite, soothing voice came over the intercom. Passenger boarding for Flight 714 to the Mediterranean coast is now commencing at Gate Alpha 12. The announcement was a gentle invitation, replacing the ticking, panicked tension of my past. It was the sound of a new chapter opening. Beatrice stood up, adjusting her cashmere wrap. She offered a warm, proud smile that contained no hidden invoices and no manipulative conditions. I took one final sip of my coffee. I set the empty mug down on the glass table. I picked up my durable carry-on bag and my dark blue passport. The ledger was balanced, the debts were paid, the ghosts of my former life were locked safely away behind federal injunctions and digital firewalls. I walked out of the lounge and headed toward the departure gate, stepping forward into a brilliant, unburdened future. The war was over, and the peace I held in my hands was entirely, undeniably mine. There is a specific kind of silence that settles into a house when a deeply held illusion finally shatters. It isn't the comforting golden quiet of a Sunday morning. It is the ringing, hollow stillness of a stage after the actors have forgotten their lines and the audience has walked away. For decades, the suburban estate in our story stood as a monument to the traditional American dream. It featured the manicured lawns, the gleaming crystal chandeliers, and the curated, smiling holiday cards sent to every affluent neighbor. But beneath the polished oak floorboards and the expensive Persian rugs, the foundation was hollowed out by a profound failure in leadership. When we reflect on the ruins of this specific family, the most haunting realization is not the severity of the financial crime, but the quiet, daily parental choices that made such a devastating betrayal inevitable. The tragedy did not begin with a forged bank document or a stolen life savings. It began years earlier, in the subtle, unseen moments of childhood, where the foundational values of honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness were traded for the mere appearance of success. In the architecture of a healthy home, parenting must be rooted in the equitable distribution of both love and accountability. Fairness does not mean identical treatment, but it requires a steadfast commitment to the emotional and moral development of every child within the household. The matriarch in this narrative, driven by her own hidden vices and an insatiable hunger for social prestige, fundamentally distorted this sacred duty. She raised a son wrapped in an impenetrable shield of enabling, teaching him that his desires were paramount and that consequences were obstacles meant only for other people. He was groomed from a young age to believe that charm, arrogance, and entitlement were valid substitutes for genuine character. Conversely, she raised a daughter to bear the crushing weight of the family's survival. The daughter was taught that her worth was tethered solely to her utility, her ability to absorb stress, and her silent financial contributions. Emotional awareness was absent from this dynamic. A parent who operates with genuine emotional intelligence recognizes the distinct spirits of their children, nurturing their individual strengths while gently correcting their flaws. Instead, this mother viewed her offspring through a cold, transactional lens. One child became the golden idol, a projection of her own aristocratic fantasies, while the other became the beast of burden, expected to absorb the collateral damage in silence, and expected to smile while doing it. This division represents a catastrophic failure of family responsibility. When a parent weaponizes the concept of loyalty to mask financial or emotional exploitation, they do not build a dynasty. They build a powder keg. They teach their children that love is conditional, measured in bank transfers, pristine aesthetics, and unquestioning submission.
The traditional family structure is meant to be a sanctuary, a place where vulnerability is protected. When that structure is inverted, making the child the protector of the parent's fragile ego and hidden debts, the natural order collapses. Long-term guidance in American culture often wrestles with the delicate balance between providing for our children and fostering their resilient independence. We want them to have better lives, to grasp opportunities we never had, and to navigate the world with confidence. But true, effective guidance requires the profound courage to let them fail. If you insulate a child from the friction of reality, if you cover their debts, excuse their cruelties, and silence their victims to protect a fragile family reputation, you are not saving them. You are paving a direct, unavoidable highway to their ultimate ruin. The son in this narrative walked into a federal interrogation room because he had never once been allowed to face a minor consequence at the kitchen table. His hubris was not entirely self-generated. It was carefully cultivated by a mother who confused protection with complicity. Honesty must be the bedrock of any enduring family structure. It is the unwavering standard that dictates we do not steal from our own blood, we do not gaslight the vulnerable, and we do not prioritize the judgmental gaze of wealthy neighbors over the sanctity of our own home. When the grandfather tapped his finger on his wheelchair, orchestrating the revelation of truth, he embodied the last remnant of true family responsibility. He understood that a painful, devastating truth is always preferable to a comfortable, rotting lie. He knew that saving the daughter meant allowing the son and the mother to fall, letting gravity take the hollow structures they had built. The journey to break these generational cycles is solitary, agonizing, and frequently misunderstood by those looking from the outside in. Setting an ironclad boundary against the people who share your last name goes against every biological and societal instinct we harbor. We are conditioned to forgive, to turn the other cheek, and to keep the family together at all costs. Yet the unyielding enforcement of personal dignity is often the only path to genuine peace. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. You cannot reason with a dynamic that demands your continuous sacrifice as the entry fee for basic affection. The daughter walked away not out of cruelty, but out of a profound, hard-earned respect for her own life. She chose the cold, clean air of reality over the suffocating, toxic warmth of a deceitful hearth. Navigating the complex terrain of family loyalty, betrayal, and the difficult road to personal freedom is a journey many walk, often in shadows and silence. If this reflection resonates with the quiet battles you fight, or if you are searching for the strength to set your own boundaries and reclaim your narrative, you are not alone. Join our community of listeners who find power in the truth. Follow the channel, Edana Told Stories, for more narratives that explore the deepest corners of resilience, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. Consider the empty spaces left behind when the dust finally settles. A quiet living room bathed in the soft, golden glow of a winter afternoon, devoid of laughter, but also entirely free of deceit. We spend our lives filling our homes with people, possessions, and expectations, terrified of the silence. We are taught that an empty chair at the dinner table is a symbol of failure, a fracture in the ideal American dream. But sometimes, looking at that vacant seat, you have to ask yourself what it previously cost you to keep it filled. Does the echo in the hallway represent the profound loneliness of walking away? Or is it the resonant sound of a space finally cleared of its poison? The answer rarely comes all at once. It arrives slowly, on a quiet morning when you pour a simple cup of coffee, look out the window, and realize for the very first time in your life that you are finally breathing your own air.